My name is Judd Chode. I'm the State Election Director for Colorado, and I'd like to welcome you to the CEA Conference on Elections Administration. You can see that we are here at the University of Minnesota at the Hubert H. Humphrey School of Public Affairs, and want to welcome all of you, those of you in the room, and also those hundreds of people that are joining online. So welcome, it should be a good day. Let me walk you through a couple of important notes. First, you can see on the slide that there is captioning available that you can use in case you want to see the words on the screen. You can also provide questions online, and we will be curating those questions throughout the broadcast today. So I'll be working those questions and then handing them to the moderator, and the moderator will be able to ask the questions that are appropriate for the panels. So please do feel free to provide a question along the way for any panels that you feel might be appropriate. On the screen, you will see the closed captioning and the ways in which you can participate. All right, next slide, please. I want to do a couple of thank yous. First, always want to thank Larry Jacobs, who's the director of the Center of Public Study, Politics and Governance at the Hubert H. Humphrey School of Public Affairs, and really the reason why we're all here today and the reason why this program even exists. So thanks to Larry. Lee Chittenden, who is the administrative director of the CEA program, and then Cody Jackett, who's a program specialist, who is the reason why all of this technology and all of this is working right now. So I want to thank Larry, Lee, and Cody. Also, I'd like to thank the CEA Advisory Board. You can see the names on the screen there. Each one of these advisory members have worked tirelessly on this conference, but also just large in a more broad way related to the CEA program. Where we're trying to figure out what classes to teach, which are most appropriate for our student base, and also trying to do some outreach to try to meet our audience and sort of better demonstrate what we can do. Next slide, please. So let me walk you through a little bit of what we do here at the CEA program. So the CEA program is a 12-credit program where you can get a certificate of elections administration for better understanding the world of elections administration. These classes are taught on a semester basis. The classes match up with semesters, either a full semester or a half semester, dependent upon the length of the class, the number of hours that are being offered. You can see there, though, that despite the fact that they match semesters, they are 24 hours accessible, and you can take the class in your basement. You don't have to come to the University of Minnesota to do it, and there's no travel involved. And we have a really strong record of bringing in excellent students, people that both have experience in elections administration and those who want to become experienced in elections administration. Many of those people, in fact, most of those people that want to go on into jobs in elections administrations have had success doing that. You can join the CEA program, and if you apply for the full certificate program, you can do that this fall. But we have classes which are going on right now, and those classes start in June. You can see Gina Roberts is teaching a class on voter outreach, and our own Jennifer Morell is teaching a class on election security. So those classes start in June. If you're interested in taking those classes or learning more, all you have to do is go to our website to learn more about those classes and when they start and how to sign up. All right, let me tell you a little bit about the day. So I think we all understand the problem that elections administrators are facing right now, and that is sort of a problem of a misunderstanding or misinformation about elections administration, the work that we do as elections administrators, or the work that you're interested in as a person who is interested in elections administration. And so this problem is both a public problem because the public in general has misconceptions about the work that we do, but it also is a problem that now has sort of meandered into other areas. So elections officials are facing difficulties from their county commissioners, their city council, their local sheriffs, and others who don't really understand the work that's done on elections administration. And because of that, they ask questions. They might do things policy-wise that affect the world of elections administration. One of the things that's happening in Colorado is that county commissions are deciding that they'll defund the voting system that the county has to use to run elections. This is kind of an example where election deniers and people who are on the periphery of elections have not found success going directly to elections administrators, because of course elections administrators tend to be more sophisticated in the work that they do. And instead they're going to other people around elections administration to cause problems. And a lot of those kinds of issues, along with open records, and then frankly, some lousy legislation, which has put elections administrators in the target of the bullseye of potential crimes that you could commit as an elections administrator, and then also having your authority taken away from you. All of those things are creating attrition among elections administrators. And so that's really what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about what are the strategies to keep very high performing elections officials in their positions, and then how can we create a cadre of new people who can fill the gaps that we have in elections administration. So that's what we're going to talk about over the course of 4 panels. The first panel is Tammy Patrick, myself, and it's moderated by Larry Jacobs. And we're going to just give you sort of the high overview of the issues that we'll talk about, and then kind of the lay of the land. The next panel is a sort of data-centric panel with Paul Gronke, Amy Cohen, and Charles Stewart, who will sort of lay out what we know from the elections administrator perspective, and then frankly from the public perspective of what they believe and think about elections administration. And then the third panel is about the elections associations in various states and how those associations can really work to build a feeling of sort of a unified force, sort of a culture of a unified voice to protect all of the people who are sort of subject to this election denial. And that panel is Amy Farrington, Shelley Poland, and Matt Crane, 3 either executive directors or presidents of elections associations around the country. And then finally, we'll tie it all up in a nice bow with Matt Masterson, Jennifer Morell, and Ryan Ronco, who will walk us through how the CEA programs, how a CEA program along with the Election Center program and other of these national programs can tie to this idea of local strong certification programs and trainings done at the state and local level. So that's the day. And with that, let me hand it over to Larry Jacobs for our first panel. And I'll scoot over to the panel.
Great. Thank you very much, Judd, for that terrific welcome to get us started. Well, let's just jump right in. Tammy Patrick, thank you so much for joining us. It's always great to have you in the conversation. So thank you. Tammy, this is the
Thanks for having me. Wish I could be there in person. Can you not hear me?
I can hear you now. Great.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, thank you so much. Welcome to my quarantine.
Well, it's we all wish you well and wish you a quick recovery. But thank you so much for joining us, particularly given the fact that you're in quarantine. Let me just start with, a flashback. If we were having this conversation a decade ago, we would be saying, oh, wow, we got to do something about the growing number of retirements. We've been talking about this for a long time. We've got to really do something about building the bench for the next generation. What's different now?
I would, that's a really good way of introducing it, because I would say that a decade ago, we had that conversation with the PCEA. One of the questions that we kind of approached with the Presidential Commission on Election Administration was this notion of professionalism. And we did get a little bit of pushback on calling it professionalism, but really it's a way in which states, whether it's through the state association or through their chief election official office, lieutenant governor's office, secretary of state, state board, as a way of formalizing the instruction of the uniformity of the administration in a given state. And we saw that there were some states that had phenomenal programs, very strong programs, had their own certifications, their own curriculum. And then there were some that either had a loosely knit social network, for lack of a better term, that didn't have the same sort of rigor. And so it was after the PCEA, as I was spending some time at both the Bipartisan Policy Center and at Democracy Fund, when Stacey Scholl had this idea that we need to bring together some of the leaders from state associations so that we can provide a convening space, or could provide a convening space for people to share what they're doing and why they have legislative committees. What is their chain I almost said chain of custody. What is their chain of leadership? Is it formalized? And it was through those meetings that we really realized the importance and the desire and the need for this sort of conversation. And so it is necessary now, because we know that there is an aging demographic within election officials. I know you mentioned Professor Gronke will be talking with us in a moment, but I do want to just briefly share some other work here very, very briefly. I have, believe it or not, I have a slide or two, because I think it demonstrates that we do see this aging demographic leaving the field. Now, some have called it the mass exodus. Some of it is in response to the 2020 election. Some of it is in response to many of the things that Judd laid out, as far as people are exhausted. And when you have a field and a profession where, quite frankly, oftentimes you're underpaid, under-resourced, and now you're under attack, people are more likely to retire when they're eligible to. And so I think that we, not only did we see this as in this study with Reed College and the Democracy Fund as something that was going to start playing out, the states themselves are showing us that this is exactly what's happening. So last week, the week before, the Election Center had an April convening, which is the extension of that work that we were doing at the Democracy Fund to bring together not only state associations, but we've expanded it to include those state programs, because we realized that some of the work is being done by associations, some of it's being done by the state chief election office, and some of it's done by both in collaboration. And unfortunately, in some places, it's being done in competition. And so it was important to hear from leaders from both sides of that coin. And what we heard from Karen Brinson-Bell from North Carolina is that this exodus is happening. And in some cases, they've had turnover of multiple directors just in the last couple of years. So it's not just that they're having to train one person, that person isn't staying in the field. They're leaving. And you'll notice that's what the double dots are. And you'll notice that where that's happening is, it is very, very problematic for those jurisdictions. So I think that when we talk about why now, part of it is that loss of institutional knowledge. Part of it is a manifestation of things that we've been talking about and working on over the last decade. And now it's coming to fruition, because the benefit here is that we are seeing some states, Kansas, pass legislation to require a state program and designated resources to create such a program. We're seeing state associations formalize their structures so that they actually can have an executive director. 5 or 6 years ago, there were 2 states with executive directors basically in the entire country. A couple of them have, had hired lobbyists, but in general, there wasn't that formal person. It was election officials taking on the role of creating, managing, and serving their associations on top of their other duties. And so I think that now is the perfect time, because it seems like some states have an appetite for creating programs. And we already know that election officials have had that appetite for a very long time. It's just that they've been under-resourced and have had time constraints in participation.
Great, thank you very much. Judge Choate, the story that Tammy's presenting in terms of Exodus and the state associations, in your capacity, state elections director in Colorado, is this familiar?
Yeah. So in Colorado, we're seeing very similar. I could put up a Colorado map. I should have prepared one that had nice dots like North Carolina. I'll have to give Karen a heads up on that next time. So it would be approximately the same. We've seen about 50% turnover over the last 2 election cycles in Colorado. But I will say that the thing that you see that's worrisome is the 2 or 3 outliers of people who you expected would be there for election after election, or would, at least if they were term limited, would be there for the full 2 terms. But instead they left after 1 term, or they left after 2 terms when you expected that at the age of 45, they would be there for another 15 years. And then when you have those conversations with them and ask questions, you really tap into the idea of they were worried for themselves. They were stressed. They were bringing that stress home to their families. They felt threatened and under attack. And for those reasons, they stepped away early in their career instead of carrying through and becoming sort of a solid member of the elections community that we could all count on. So it's those stray 2 or 3 or 4 examples in your state that are really concerning. And frankly, it's not just happening at the county clerk level, because we often will talk about the chief election official of whatever the jurisdiction is, but it's happening also at the next layer, which is the elections administrator layer, or at the election specialist layer, because they're the ones that are on the day-to-day experience, getting pushed these harassing and threatening sort of situations. And frankly, they're the ones that have to do all those open records requests. They're the ones that are getting pushed all of these weird off PD kinds of assignments that are really quite unusual and weren't part of the original reason why they joined that office. And so, frankly, a lot of that work is legal work. And in many cases, these are not lawyers or people that wanted to be lawyers. And so, that whole sort of series of issues are driving people away from this work. Maybe it's only a few more people than we would have seen before, but those 3 or 4 or 5 people at different levels are really causing strife in these counties, because instead of replacing a county clerk, you're replacing a county clerk and an elections administrator. And then they've been completely decapitated. And then you've got a real problem, and your state really needs to come in and help them to be a professional operation. And that then feeds into state problems, and all of these things become dominoes.
Tammy mentioned the kind of history of the idea of professionalization over the last decade.
Mm-hmm.
How does that fit in with the story you're telling? What is this? In some ways, is this an opportunity? And if so, what is it responding to?
Yeah, absolutely. I will try to make lemonade out of this situation. And what we have right now is the combination of we have an industry that is suffering under the weight of many of these outside pressures. We used to be sort of the sleepy backwater of local public policy, and now we're front and center. And so that's requiring a different set of skills. It's requiring a different background and education. And that is happening in tandem with the growth of Election Center, which is Tammy Patrick's new gig. And congratulations on the great work you're doing with Election Center. and the CEA program, which is they work together very nicely because Tammy's is sort of for more senior elections officials, and ours is for more early in their career elections officials and for people that want to get into elections administration. So those two things are working nicely in tandem as we have this increased attrition and the need for professionalization. These programs are popping up, or in the case of Election Center, they're expanding and becoming even more entrenched. So that dual thing that's happening in the world of elections administration is really useful in sort of meeting that need. And I'm hopeful, and I think this speaks to what Tammy was saying, that the PCEA proposals of now a decade ago are where we're headed in the professionalization of the industry, where really to be successful as a candidate for a job, you should have already taken some trainings. You should already understand the world in which you're getting into. And to be good at the job at an entry level and have a chance to become better at the job at a secondary level, you should be taking accreditation classes at your state level or at your local level, or perhaps at one of these national programs. And then and as a candidate for a county clerk's position or related position, you should have already gone through Election Center, or you should be at the PCEA, so or at the CEA program. So there's this, all of this should be sort of the foundation work that leads us to a more professionalized industry.
Tammy, when you look at other professions, let's say the legal profession and others, there is a kind of an expectation that if you're going to practice law, you're going to have a law degree and you're going to have continuing education. Does that strike you as a kind of a model for election administration? I mean, there's a tremendous amount of talent, and those of us who know what goes on a regular basis are awed by what is done and the level of competence. But when you look to the future and the idea of professionalism, do you see the kind of certification, the ongoing training from other professions that you'd like to see in election administration?
And I think there are some good analogies and parallels to look at there, and not only just with something like a practicing attorney, because there it's a requirement to pass the bar and to have that certification, but in other even county or municipal governance departments. So we know that other areas of public service have ongoing training that is well supported, well funded, well resourced. I mean, look at sheriff's associations, look at the other associations across your governance structure, and find out how much those departments are paying for their memberships, for their training. And it is going to be well in advance of anything any election office has ever asked for. And I think that's the sort of disparity that we need to address. The other piece here is that, you know, I got my CIRA certification through the Election Center, the National Association of Election Officials, in 2007. And I never put CIRA after my name until recently, because it just seemed kind of, I don't know, like I was bragging that I had that that certification. We need to change that. We need to embrace it as a profession and put CEA, put the CIRA, put or SERVE, which is the certification for our vendor supporters and partners. Put your state certification acronym, initialism, after your name. I think one of the things we need to do is embrace the professionalism that our life's work already has, and demonstrate that to the world. Now, I mentioned the notion of making it a requirement. There are jurisdictions that are while it may not be a requirement to be certified, they are in fact using it in the hiring process, in their job descriptions, as something that is aspirational or something that will give a candidate, a leg up on other applicants. And there are some states that have certification requirements and mandates in law. So in Arizona, where I was, for quite some time, we had a certification requirement that was necessary before you could handle ballots. And so there was training and a whole process and procedure that was mandated. Now, along those lines, if you're going to have a mandate, you darn well better support it with the resources that election officials are going to need. Also with the understanding that it's going to be challenging for our rural and our very remote offices because, and I don't want to steal all of Professor Gronke's thunder, we know that there's a third of the election of offices in this country. They don't have a full-time elections employee. So how do we reach that election professional with what they need in the right and appropriate way? And I truly believe that that's through the state associations and using those state associations as a way to provide uniformity of understanding of both the state law, but also exposure to all the things being offered at the national level. You named a number of people that are speaking today from national organizations that provide all sorts of tools, trainings, resources, and that's really what we need to embrace in this moment. Unfortunately, though, as we know, there are states that have prohibitions now against receiving any sort of support from that's paid for by any sort of private funding. And those are some tricky waters for election officials to navigate. And as Judd mentioned, in some places, there are some really severe repercussions if they get it wrong. So that's an answer that's all over the place, but there's just so much to talk about. I think that the rest of the panels can clarify anything that I got wrong.
Well, that's very helpful. I mean, Judd, do you see the kind of professionalization as having this kind of almost sociological effect on others? I mean, you get the training, yes, but it's also about credibility, right? And it's also about establishing election administration as a career with an appropriate and comparable level of reward and administrative support.
Absolutely. The other feature of it is if you are aware that there is a certification program for elections administration, either within your jurisdiction or nationally, then you have now a group of people that you are identified with that are your colleagues nationally as well as locally or in your state. And you then feel sort of allied with this group, and you can rely on that group. And Election Center obviously has had great success of over 1,000 graduates. I think you guys are nearing 2,000 people associated with Election Center. Congratulations, Tammy. So what is that? That's a universe of elections administrators who are aware of each other and can connect with those people and feel like you're part of a group of people that understand the world in which you live. And frankly, I will give you the opposite side of that coin, and that is when you have people who are not connected to their state association, who are not certified, who did not go through the process of understanding the work that they do, they are much more subject to people who don't understand the work that they do, but can tap into their fears about their lack of understanding. And we saw that in Colorado, where we had a county clerk who succumbed to election deniers and made some very poor decisions, frankly, decisions that likely will alter her life going forward. And in many respects, that was because she wasn't connected to her organization. She did not feel a part of a group of people that she could rely on and ask tough questions of. And it's just, it's a really sad situation where somebody's done some real harm to their future. And in doing so, did nothing to illuminate the world of elections administration, quite the contrary. So that's sort of the downside to, if we don't professionalize, if we don't do a better job of becoming part of a whole, then we expose ourselves to those possible downsides as well.
Tammy, there's a lot of talk, and there has been for years, about state associations and the roles that they can play. Now, there are a bunch of folks joining us online who may be new to election administration. Could you give the Tammy Patrick concise description of what is a state association and what is the role that they can be playing or are playing now and could be playing in the future?
Larry, I don't know that Tammy Patrick and concise have ever been used attached to one another, but I will certainly try. So across the 50 states, there are roughly 168 or so associations of election officials who have some role to play in how elections are conducted in their state. And actually, that list is available on electionline.org under state associations. And if you go there and you see something that's out of date, let us know. But basically, what you'll see there is that you'll find states like Florida, where the Florida supervisors of elections handle all of the election processes. So everything from registering a voter to having candidate filing, to getting that voter a ballot, to counting the ballot, to results, they do it all. Other states have those different activities divided up, and you might have 5 associations in some of the states because one election official may only have the voter registration piece of it. Another department, another election official may be the person who handles vote by mail or absentee voting. Another may handle candidate filing, and so on. So these associations are varied, of course, like everything in elections across the country. And their role of how they play out in their state is also dramatically different. And this is some of what we found in our meetings and our biannual convenings with election officials. So there are some that have a very formalized structure. They have trainings, they have multiple conferences a year, they have communication channels and networks. They have committees that address legislation. Others, they get together maybe once a year. And I've had people tell me, I didn't know state associations could be a robust, professionalizing gathering. It was always kind of like a family reunion in my state. We didn't really have any formalized structure. So there are, there's that spectrum of what a state association is, what it does. And I think that the real takeaway here is that we love to talk in elections about one size doesn't fit all, one size doesn't fit all. But at the end of the day, there's so much that people are doing that's exactly the same type of activities, the same type of tasks. And we should be looking at how can we distill down to the basic needs of what election officials are in a state. And if I could, I'll just share really quickly a couple. I have 2 more slides. Believe it or not, I kept it to only 4 slides. And the example that I have for a couple of the trainings, if I can get it to advance. Here's an example from the Florida supervisors of elections, and this is their curriculum for all the courses that they have. You will see it is incredibly robust. It is extensive. It's comprehensive. They've won a number of awards over the years because of this program. And it goes on with recertification. There are, all sorts of great content here. This, while you may not be able to replicate it exactly in other states, is a great example of what some states are doing. In our conference that we just had in Houston for Election Center, I loved this slide, and this is from the Walker Institute at Weber University in Utah, and they just started their training program through the Lieutenant Governor's Office, and they approached their curriculum from this perspective. Half of it's the toolkit, and half of it's for your soul. And I think that 10 years ago, nobody was thinking about, at least that I ever remember anyone talking about, the soul of election officials. We toiled away in obscurity. We did our jobs. If we wanted to do voter outreach, there were a lot of people in the profession that said that wasn't our job, right? You just create the ballot, count the ballot, you're done. But now we're in a different place. And I think that this is really where even the most established programs can step back. I know I'm doing this with our CIRA program and with our REO program, which is our state-based training that we do for state associations through the Election Center, and thinking about how do we make sure we're doing all of these things, that we're covering the skills, but also those less tangible skills that we need in order to maintain, a perspective that allows us to do this work. Because for as passionate as everyone is who gets into election administration, it can really take its toll in the current environment. So we need to make sure that we're feeding both the knowledge that's necessary, but also that that desire to go back into the office yet again and take on yet another day, because it's going to be a different day than we've ever seen before.
Judge Hote, I know you've had a lot of experience with state associations as well.
Yeah, so the one thing I would add to what Tammy said is state associations also give individuals who individually have very little power in public policy making, collective power to affect public policy making at a state or potentially even national level. In Colorado, the state association is very powerful, as witnessed by how legislation often that the state office, my office, might oppose or feel uncomfortable about the state association. They can go to their members and lobby across the legislature, legislators, senators and House members, and get something through that our office would be, well, we would do it differently than that. And they have more power to get that done than pretty much any other organization in state government.
We are about to run out of time, so we're going to have a lightning round here. I'm going to have a question for each of you, and it's going to be a test on conciseness.
Okay, I'll try to pass.
Judd, if you were to identify, one bit of data or knowledge that you think a group of folks working in a state should be bringing forward, highlighting to build their state association and to gain credibility and resources within their state, what is that knowledge and data?
Well, so I'll just give you sort of a nuts and bolts idea. So right now, Hillary Rudy, who's our deputy state election director, is out in our state with our trainer doing, Anna Sheffield is a trainer, by the way. They are doing trainings around the state right now. And a big piece of that training is helping counties to write better contracts with their coordinating entities. So local governments that you coordinate with on constructing a ballot, how do you write a better contract so that you properly assess the prices associated with the work that you're doing, but also make sure that, hey, your local administrators have to keep to the various things that they are obligated to do in the timelines that they're obligated to do it. And that's the kind of thing that an associate training through an association can really help local elections administrators.
Great. Tammy, I'm filtering in questions we're getting from folks here and also online. This is a question that's come from a variety of different places, but this question is from Wyoming in particular, which says, how can small states work to build capacity and professionalism in their county election administration locations?
So I think that, and that's a great question, and it's a tough nugget when you have, a lot of rural offices and you have the time constraints of travel, of distance, of limitations of who can cover the office when you're gone and what's available to you. So I do think that the state associations are the place to turn to, and not to be a shameless plug, but to join our election center April convenings and our conversation around what are other states doing? Who are they bringing in for speakers? What kind of content are available through whether it's the Election Center's REO program or other training programs to make sure that the state has available options for getting things out to the localities all across the state, because that's part of the challenge. Is that what we're seeing is that in many cases, the larger jurisdictions, the more well-resourced jurisdictions are able to obtain this knowledge and this education somewhat disproportionately for rural locations. Now, I will say that one exception to that rule, and this has to do with one of the questions in the chat around, how are election officials addressing legislative questions? And I will say that legislative committees, they mentioned Florida, the association will write letters for or against certain acts, for or against certain policies. They'll testify, they'll hold town hall meetings, they'll hold tours for their legislators. They'll incentivize, passing legislation that actually allows for an increase in salary when you're certified. So Louisiana, if a Louisiana association or a Louisiana official gets certified nationally, they get a bump in salary. I think it's 7%. So there's an incentive there for people to do it. And we see that that actually does reach out to some of those rural locations because it's a way for them to increase their salary, when in other cases, it's just not a viable option.
Thank you very much. We got 1 minute left. Judge Choate, another question. What suggestions do you have? And you're on kind of both sides. You're an election administrator, but you're also a boss.
Yeah, that's true.
Um,
I don't know how I balance those, if I balance those well or not. We could ask some of the people that are on the
So here's
program right
the question for you. What are your suggestions for enlightening government about the need to acknowledge the work of election administrators and provide adequate compensation?
Really good question. So I think the next thing to do, which is sort of on my legislative agenda going forward, is the legislative approach that Tammy just mentioned, like what they have in Louisiana. I think that's the next barrier for us, which is creating ways in which the state law or state policy permits or even requires that people at certain levels of elections administration get paid at appropriate salaries.
Great. Thank you very much, Tammy Patrick. Always great to have you. And I just love this kind of camaraderie that you and Judd have with regards to your respective programs. That's exactly what we need. And thank you very much, Judd Choate, boss and colleague. And we're now going to shift over to our next panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Morning, everybody. It's good to see everybody here, some familiar faces and new faces. My name is Neil Kelly. I am the former registrar of voters for Orange County, California. I retired. I'm not that aging demographic, by the way, that Tammy talked about.
Not living in Hawaii.
Yeah, exactly. And I did that for almost 17 years, fourth largest county in the United States, just shy of 2 million voters. So that was a long haul for me in that time period. I think election officials take the cue from Tom Brady when it comes to retiring or not retiring, because my alleged retirement hasn't really started yet. I have been, well, in 22, I helped the state of Hawaii through their elections during that midterm cycle. And I've been the chairman of a committee called the Committee for Safe and Secure Elections. We're a cross-partisan group of former and current election officials and law enforcement designed to focus on the threats to election officials and the associated risks. So I've been doing that for the last year as well. This distinguished panel we have this morning is here to talk about what election officials are saying. And they're saying a lot, as you can imagine, especially as we lead into the 24 cycle. Some topics certainly will depend on what part of the country you're from or what the topics are in your communities. But there are universal topics as well. And we're going to hear a little bit about that this morning as well. Topics can range, and I'm sure you have a nice list as well, but topics can range from voter registration growth, how to manage data, supply chain issues, which are going to continue into 24, observers and transparency, physical and cybersecurity, paying attention to the stressors and mental health that election officials and their staff are going through, and partisan audits, I use air quotes on that, and investigations that we will, I'm sure, see through the 24 cycle. And the list goes on. Joining us today for this conversation are three distinguished individuals. Many of you know them, and I am honored to have known all three for a good majority of my career and awesome people to work with. I'm going to introduce them briefly and then give them about 10 minutes to talk about the topic. And then we'll jump into Q&A towards the end of that. I'll introduce on my left, your right, starting off with Amy Cohen. Amy is the Executive Director of the National Association of State Election Directors, known as NASED. In that role, she represents all 50 states, DC, and the 5 United States territories. NASED is the only national association just for state and territorial election officials. Next to Amy is Paul Gronke. Professor Gronke is the founding director of the Elections and Voting Information Center, EVIC. or EBIC, I don't know what we should say, and a professor of political science at Reed College in Oregon. He is a nationally known scholar of American politics, elections, and research methods. He is widely published with more than 36 peer-reviewed articles, book chapters, and an academic book on a variety of topics related to election administration. And then joining us on screen is Professor Charles. He was. Joining us on screen is Professor Charles Stewart, is the Keenan Sahin Distinguished Professor of Political Science at MIT and the founding director of the MIT Election Data and Science Lab. Hey, Charles, good to see you back there. So first, actually, Charles, I'm going to turn it over to you first to, if that's okay, to give us your take on what election officials are saying and the topic at hand, and about 10 minutes worth. Thanks, Charles.
Sure. And actually, I don't want to usurp the prerogative of the chair, but I'm wondering whether we want Amy and Paul to go first, given what I'm going to say.
Charles, you forgot who's running this program here.
I did. Like I said, I'm happy to go.
Charles, that's a great point. How about Amy? We'll start with you.
Well, sure. After that, how could I not? As Neil mentioned, I'm the executive director of the National Association of State Election Directors, or NASED. And I do really want to thank Judd and the University of Minnesota and Humphrey School for having me today. Before I sort of dive into what my members are saying, I'll sort of explain who my members are, because not everyone, it doesn't make sense to everyone. So in the 40 states where a Secretary of State or Lieutenant Governor serves as the chief election official, the member on my roster works for the chief election official. So that includes Minnesota, and David Maeda, the director of elections, is here today. In the other 10 states, DC and the 5 US territories, NASED's member is the chief election official. And these are typically states that have a board model. So the North Carolina State Board of Elections, because Tammy was using North Carolina as an example. But what that means is that I cover all 50 states, DC, and the 5 US territories. That's a lot of ground to cover, right? That's American Samoa and Guam to California and Texas, and quite literally everyone in between. And so I hear a lot from a lot of people all of the time. NASED doesn't do some of the things that Judd was talking about that some of the state associations do. We don't take positions on issues. We don't lobby. And we really are an association that supports our members by helping them share information across the states, helping the federal government share information more effectively with the states and territories, something that has grown increasingly important in the wake of the critical infrastructure designation in February 2017. And we help our members connect with each other as sort of humans. Which is candidly something I have really had to shift my brain to think about, because I tend to think of election officials as like election official robots, and that's all they focus on. And the fact of the matter is that's not all they focus on, right? They're all people. And so one of the things that we did during the pandemic was we started doing weekly calls with our members to help them share information with each other, issues that were coming up in their states. So an example is, if you, when bars and restaurants were closed and people were getting unemployment for that, if those people served as poll workers, how did that impact their unemployment benefits? And how could we share information about things like that? But it also really turned into supporting each other as people. And helping everyone sort of cope through a presidential election, which is always really hard and is sort of a benchmark in our fields of when people start thinking about retirement anyway. But also there were humans who were also experiencing the COVID-19 pandemic. Their families were getting sick, their kids were home from school. So helping people in that way. And we've continued doing some of that. We've shifted the calls to bi-weekly, but we are continuing to sort of support our members in that way. And one of the things, a couple of the things that I want to emphasize are things that came up on the previous panel, and I'm certain will continue to come up over the course of today. Tammy said that people are exhausted, and that I foot stomp. I don't work for the federal government, but I would like to foot stomp that. You know, in elections, we've always said there is no off year. And that has never been more true. It did, however, used to be that it was a little bit slower in an odd year. Not every state has elections, but, you know, people had time to sort of regroup and pull themselves together and feel refreshed and energized going into an even year. Unfortunately, that's not where we are right now. And so people really are exhausted, and burnout is a thing that is happening. In addition to the fact that, as I mentioned, presidential election years tend to be benchmarks in our field when people consider retirement anyway, because they are always very, very difficult. Judd mentioned something really important, and he talked about staff and the election staff in a local election office. And that is really true at the state level as well. But I want to take that one step further. It's not just about election staff, election specific staff who are having a hard time wanting to stay in their role. We're talking about the lawyers, we're talking about the communication staff, we're talking about the administrative staff. And that goes hand in hand with some of the threats and the harassment that people are seeing, whether or not it meets the definition of a crime. You know, it's important. I do another presentation where I say all talking is communicating, and that sounds very basic, but it's an important thing to remember that anytime, you know, an administrative assistant is picking up the phone and saying, "Hi, can I help you?" In many places and sporadically, sometimes those people are dealing with vitriol on the other end. And it's not a crime to express an opinion in that way, but it wears on you over time. The first one might be okay, the second one might be okay, but by the time you're answering your 1,000th call where someone is calling you a traitor, that weighs on you. I also want to say the same thing about communication staff, because I think they bear the brunt of this as well when we're talking about social media and monitoring office social media accounts and things like that. You know, the first comment calling your boss or your chief election official a traitor, okay, you can maybe, you know, let that roll off you, but the 500th or 1,000th, it starts to weigh on you. And so we are seeing a lot of turnover at the state level as well, on the election side, at the election director level, but also beneath that. I have members who it took them 6 months to hire an attorney because they needed an attorney for their office to deal with the influx of open records requests. And that attorney gave notice after 6 months because it was like, this is too much. And so a lot of the same issues that local election officials are dealing with are happening at the state level as well. And states are having a very difficult time staffing up a lot of these positions. I alluded to this, but the burden of false information is something that I think needs to be addressed or at least mentioned, because it permeates everything. 100% of the well, maybe that was going a little too far, especially as I'm on a panel with academics with actual numbers, but a lot of the issues that state election officials are dealing with are exacerbated by false information. So we're seeing, you know, as I mentioned, threats and harassment directed at state election offices in a variety of different formats. Much of that is driven by false information. We're seeing a lot of legislation that is in some places driven by false information. And all of these things wear on you because, you know, it's very difficult for an election office to, first of all, have a loud enough voice that anyone will listen to them. I always say that election officials are never the loudest megaphone in the room, and that is 100% true. But election officials have the sort of challenge where they can't hang up the phone, right? You can't just say, we're not taking calls today, or we're not answering questions. They're public servants. And so they have to step up, they have to answer questions. And so that can be very, very difficult, especially because it is hard to argue or you're not going to convince someone who believes misinformation, and you sort of have to suss out, are they uninformed, are they misinformed, and how can we move forward on that? Finally, I'll close with one of the, I think, biggest shifts in the field that we've seen in the last couple of years is this difference between professional attacks, right? This office did something that I don't like. We're going to pass legislation to change it, or we're going to, try to influence policy in this way because this office did something we don't like, versus this person is the problem. And so it's the difference between the personal and the professional, and that makes people feel scared and feel vulnerable in a way that I don't think that they did before. And it's also very difficult to prepare for that, and very difficult to hire into that, because how do you hire people into an office where you might become a target for an innocent mistake or not a mistake at all? And so that is very challenging and has really shifted the way I think NASED members and state and territorial election offices are thinking about some of these issues. I know that was like very gloom and doom, but I do want to say that one of the things I'm very proud of is this fact that NASED has really worked hard over the last several years at building a community among our members so that they have a person in another state who really truly understands what they're going through, because these jobs are so weird. It's very difficult to explain an election office job to someone who has never done it. And so we worked really hard at building that community, and it's something I'm very proud of. And I hope that I hope it's paying off for my members. I get the sense that it is, but it's definitely something that we're planning to continue.
Weird is an understatement. Amy, thank you for your work in this space and everything that you do. It's incredible the work that you do. And also you've teed up some great stuff for the questions. So thank you. Professor Gronke.
Thank you, Neil. And thanks to the Humphrey School and Larry Jacobs, who I've known for many years. Judd mentioned at the beginning that Judd Choate mentioned that election administration is kind of a sleepy backwater in state and local government, and now it's not anymore. I will say, reflecting on this as a scholar, that it's also been something of a sleepy backwater in the academic sphere. Charles Stewart, who's here, myself, and we leaned in, as many scholars did after 2000, but unfortunately by 2004, 2005, a lot of those folks leaned somewhere else. Some of others are still in there swinging. And I'm glad to see that. I'm glad that the University of Minnesota has continued to support this program. It really is important that we have more scholarly attention here, so we begin to train students, expose new generations, begin to develop a new cadre of individuals. Some people are going to be retiring simply because it's time to retire, but we got to have somebody to replace them. I also want to echo what Amy Cohen said about the human element of this. You're going to see in my slides some presentations, some surveys that we have been conducting through EVIC for the last 4 years. And when I initially started this project, one of the things I described was we want to do the human element, the human side of election administration. We don't want to replicate the election administration and voting survey, which is very important, which is really sort of an accounting report. We want to allow election administrators to express their attitudes and opinions about election administration in really sort of a safe space with a confidential instrument. And that was really valuable. We've learned so much. I learn so much every day when I come to these kinds of things, communities, network supports. These are things we need to know a lot more about and really support amongst these communities. The earlier wave of work on election administration did reflect sort of how Amy described it, as the election administrator is a cog in a system, but they're also human beings, and the human element is really important. So can we get my deck up, and let me see if I can advance this. Let's see if the range works here. It's gonna come. I know it. Perfect. Thanks so much. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is really briefly in my 10-minute time, review research primarily from a 2022 study survey that we conducted at EVIC. I'm going to make some references to, okay, so that's good. That's back. So that's like about slide. Yeah, keep going. Backwards, backwards. Yep, backwards, backwards, backwards. I'm going the wrong way. Hold on. Ah, I see. Up is down. Excellent. Okay. So we have been surveying election administration nationwide since 2018 with my colleagues at EVIC. Dr. Paul Manson, Michelle Schaefer has provided us some support. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the results of that survey. I'm also going to try not to be completely doom and gloom, though, with Neil here in the sunny state of Hawaii. I figure we have to have a little darkness and clouds. You know, it's still winter in Portland, it feels like at times. So let me see if I got this, if this is working. Go, forward me. Go, just hit it forward. So I'm going to start a little bit with workforce and staffing challenges. And let me see if it'll advance. Good. So this is one thing that I have to show to every audience. I know many of the viewers online and folks in the audience will understand this, but really the diversity of the workforce and staffing challenges in offices is just really fundamental. That there are dramatic differences across the largest jurisdictions in the United States, and of course those small jurisdictions. Most elected, a typical election official in the United States serves at an office with 2 to 3 additional staff members surrounding them. And you know, they don't really have much support under COVID situations, other kinds of challenges, even challenges like sending someone off to training. They may not be able to do it because there's really nobody to cover. As anyone who works in this space knows, recording has to go on every, you know, those property transactions have to be recorded. You can't just close the office on a Friday because somebody's coming in to close property. So that's really important to understand as we think about supporting this community and advancing the community. We have to support those mid-sized and smaller sized jurisdictions that are facing real staffing challenges. So this is a stylized chart that others in the room may want to throw stones at us. But what we tried to do here is in parallel with the report that we're working on supporting the with the support of the state of Oregon, is we tried to capture the ebb and flow of the work that election administrators describes to us. And what became clear to us in our interviews was that the peak capacity is beyond their capacity. That if that, you know, the line that we drew, kind of the A, you know, the B line at the bottom is kind of the normal workflow. At least in the state of Oregon, I expect another vote by mail states, there is a peak that occurs in the kind of ballot preparation period that really expands. That you have to proof these ballots, you have to get them out, you have to get them printed and returned. And that often we find officials telling us, this is not a month before the election. This is 6 to 9 months before the election. And they tell us that they're beyond the capacity of their normal workforce. And this is not a period where they're going to be bringing in temp staff normally, right? This is, you know, this is January and February of a normal election year. Then there's some downtime, but then there's that flow that comes in again and really expands. And we'll have officials telling us, you know, that they are working well beyond the normal capacity of their office. They're coming in on the weekends, they're coming in after hours. And so we have some officials telling us these things in our interviews, that, you know, a vacation, they don't take vacations, that they're constantly working, that if they take a vacation, the stress of simply taking some time off is worse than just continuing to work. You know, we have parents telling us that, and primarily this is a 75% female staffed profession, telling us, I'm a mom, except during the election year when somebody else is a mom. And these are, you know, these are hard things to hear from officials as they're describing this environment to us. The new environment that has emerged over the last 5 or 6 years, the threats, harassments, and flood of public records requests, we've also heard this from our respondents. So Tammy Patrick helpfully showed you this slide. So if you did this, here it is again. The one addition I have to the part that, I'm sorry, it's a retirement one that's coming up. So this is Officials told us in 2022, 1 in 4 told us that they had experienced some level of harassment. And, there's not a lot of bipartisanship in today's political environment, but this is one area that we can get agreement on. Republicans, Democrats, females, males, large jurisdictions, small jurisdictions, they all get threats and harassments. Now, there are some patterns that we can extract from the data. There seems to be more threats and harassments in Republican leaning areas and in larger jurisdictions. But in general, this is endemic in the community and it's experienced. And it's not, as Amy said, it's not just the directors that are experiencing this. It's folks in their day-to-day lives. In some of our personal interviews, people say, well, I don't share what I do about my job anymore because I don't know what I'm going to encounter in the grocery store or in a tavern. So again, folks will tell us that the threats and harassments is seriously distracting from their ability to do their job, that the constant efforts to counter misinformation, that somebody heard something somewhere is distracting from their ability to do their work. I'm sorry for some of these quotes that are coming up. We have officials telling us about they've had to learn how to do active shooter training on top of learning how to manage viruses, on top of learning how to do LinkedIn or to do TikTok videos, that it's sort of hard to keep up. And we were talking about this last night at dinner. Some of these offices are in locations where they weren't set up to have 2 exits and bulletproof glass. That they're not set up for that. And again, this has just been layered on as a new area of expertise that officials have had to master. I'm going to start with a little bit of the good and then go into bad and the ugly. On the ugly, you'll see Tammy's slide picture again. We do see high levels of job satisfaction. This has been quite consistent across our surveys from 2018 up to 2022. Some erosions after 2020, but generally 3/4 to 85% of officials tell us they do enjoy their jobs. They do have a sense of personal accomplishment. You've heard this if you talk with officials, this kind of active day-to-day element of this work, they really find rewarding. Customer service orientation, it has been embraced in the profession. I think we haven't been measuring this back to the 2000s, but I do think the PCA and other many folks in this room who I've worked with for 10 or 15 years, some of them, I think this has been a change in the profession, this sort of embracing professionalism, just really kind of openly. When Tammy was describing, I quickly went on to LinkedIn and I searched for the number of officials who listed CIRA. Top of the list was Tammy Patrick, Dina Dawson, who might be listening, Denver County, there it is, CIRA, Jay Hatfield in Shawnee County, Kansas, there, right there is CIRA. I will say to Tammy that there's about 50 out there that mention the full certificate name. I do think that it would be encouraging, and I encourage her to try to, as her graduates and others, mention CIRA up there, right up on the name. Don't mention it down in the certificate category of LinkedIn, but put it right up there, just like PhD. Michelle Schaefer, I work with, professors are often a bit embarrassed to put PhD after their names. And Michelle's like, no, you got to put PhD out there. That sends something to the community outside of academia to put that PhD. Same with CIRA. It describes that kind of certification. It becomes an acknowledgement of the expertise that you've gained. The bad, well, one of the bads that we hear a lot, we've heard this quite consistently, is that legislators, maybe election directors in Colorado, no, not there. Change is really fast. Change is occurring quickly, and at least when we ask election officials, local officials about whether some of these legislative changes are helpful, the majority say they're not. Change is occurring very quickly. Often these changes are not funded. So there are new mandates without the money here. So election officials tell us that quite consistently. You saw this from Tammy already. Workloads are increasing across the board. They're stretching the capacity. We have far too many officials telling us that they are considering retirements, and these retirements are accelerating. There's a great loss of expertise and institutional knowledge in the field. So I do want to close by just briefly reviewing where we've been and give you a tool to look at some of these data on your own. So there we go. So the work here was supported with a partnership and collaboration with Democracy Fund for its first 4 years. We have evolved and developed the survey to adapt to what we view and what we hear from audiences like this about the current needs of the community. Our election year surveys tend to focus on readiness, Obviously, in 2020, for example, we did a deep dive into COVID preparations and how that impacted. In the off years, we have tended to focus on workforce issues, staffing, retirement, succession planning, these kinds of things. I will say in 2023, we are focusing on what we will call resilience. We're doing deep dives in the instrument on, we are now being supported by the MIT Election Data Science Lab. Thank you, Charles, for that support. I mean, we're looking at recruitment training and workforce issues. As I mentioned already, we are in the final stage of an interview project that we've done with the support of the state of Oregon. There'll be, we may be able to be presenting that in some summer conferences, but we're really excited about that work. Many of the quotes you've seen here have come directly from that project. This is where our website is, evic.reed.edu. And what I want to show you here is that survey. You may not be able to see that well, but this is from that page. And we have the descriptive statistics in the code book from each year of our survey. Now you can navigate through. So for example, Amy can't see this in the back of the room. So we have evaluations of state associations. There's a whole series of those. So you could do a deep dive into that. I know I'll show you that later, but it's fairly easy to navigate. We have these data publicly broken down by jurisdiction size. We can do some additional analyses if you reach out to us, but we're trying to make the data as available as we can while maintaining the confidentiality of our respondent pool. So this is our website and my contact information. My colleagues at EVIC, if you have any more questions, I want to do any follow-ups, we welcome hearing from you.
Thank you so much, Paul. And thank you for everything that you do in the industry as well. You know, you were talking about the job satisfaction surveys, and it struck me that I recalled your surveys coming in a little bit after the certification of the election. And it made me think of an interview with Steven Spielberg one time when he said, after a movie wraps, he never wants to make another movie ever again. I feel kind of the same way with elections a little bit. And after you get away from the pain of that, then the job satisfaction creeps back in. So thank you again. Professor Stewart.
Easy. Thanks, Neil, and thanks to the Humphrey School for sponsoring this and for everybody on the call today. I'm sorry I can't be there. I'm unlike Professor Gronke, apparently, I teach students, and I have a classes right after this seminar. Otherwise, I would love to be there. In part, for reasons that have been touched on by both Amy and Paul, that you know, this really is a community, and it's a rich community and a growing rich community of election officials supporting each other. But it's also a larger ecosystem of people who see themselves as helping election officials and working with election officials. And over the last 20 years, that community has grown as well. And whenever I can be with election officials and people who support them, that's my happy space. And so I would rather be in Minnesota than in the seminar room. And I'm sorry I can't be there today. So what I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to, I hope I'll be able to share my screen in just a second, is different from what Amy and Paul have talked about. I'm going to turn the lens around of the camera. And so Amy and Paul have, from their experience, been able to talk compellingly about the experience of state officials and local election officials, both over time and in the particular moment. My research and my public opinion research has focused on what voters have to say about the experience and their experience of voting. And so that's going to be the lens that I use for these remarks here, is to talk from a survey that I've been conducting since the 2008 election called the Survey of the Performance of American Elections. This is a survey that goes out to 200 registered voters in every state plus the District of Columbia. And we ask them about their experience voting and a lot of other opinions they might have about the experience as well. It got started in the aughts because there was, during the time, and folks on the call, if you're old enough, you will remember that in the view of many voters, the United States wasn't a whole lot different from a banana republic. a lot of what was in the news really focused on the negative experiences that voters were having. And part of that came out of the Florida recount and all of that. But the press and others were primed to really focus on the negative. And my colleagues and I thought that, well, there are things in the election space that certainly could be improved, but unless we talk to voters about their experience, we really don't know how widespread problems are. And so it's important to talk to them. So in the same way that Paul has been talking to election officials, we've been talking to voters about their experience for the past now decade and a half. So we have we were able to do this survey right after the 2022 election. We have been able to do every presidential election from 8, 12, 16, and 20, and then also the midterm of 2014. So we can talk about how things have gone over this time period. What I'm going to talk about today is kind of set some of the context, kind of the voter context for some of the topics that have been talked about today. So with that bit of throat clearing, let me see if I can share my screen. I hope I'm shared. If not, I can. It looks like my screen's behind Neil there, so I will move ahead. So I'm going to talk about 3 topics that I think are relevant to this larger discussion that are covered in the survey. First of all, just about the voter experience in 2022. Secondly, touch on issues of voter confidence. And then finally, just say a very brief word about how voters are seeing some of the efforts that local and state election officials are undertaking in order to secure elections in this time. So just about the voter experience. Since 2008, we've been asking people who voted on election day 4 core questions about their experience on that day. And these come out from those sorts of problems that were commonly reported in the aughts and have continued to be commonly reported since then. Did you have a problem with your registration when you went to vote? Did you encounter any problems with the voting equipment? What about the polling place? Was it well run? And what about the poll workers? How well did they perform their job? And in 2022, just as in every other year, we see that respondents overwhelmingly say they didn't have problems with registration, they didn't have problems with the voting machines. Things were run either very well or okay in their polling place. And the job performance, 95% of voters said the job performance of the poll workers was either excellent or good. So this is not an electorate this is not an electorate voting in a banana republic. This is not an electorate that is having a bad experience when they go to vote on election day. Same sorts of answers come from people who voted by mail. We asked if they had problems getting their ballot, problems marking the ballot, problems following the instructions on the ballot. And again, overwhelmingly, voters report ease in getting the ballot, marking the ballot. And most say the instructions were very easy to follow, either very easy or somewhat easy to follow. All of this comes together when we ask voters their overall trust in whether their vote was counted as they intended. This is the question that we've asked, similar to questions that are asked by other pollsters. Regardless of how you ask the question exactly, you get the same general answers. And in 2022, when we asked people if they were confident that their vote was counted as they intended, election day, early voting, and mail voting voters all overwhelmingly said that they were either very confident or somewhat confident that their vote was counted. So the actual experience of voters, and I think this is important to as we try to understand the larger context in which election officials are having, are facing real challenges from certain segments of society that when we think about the blocking and tackling, the everyday work of election officials, their customers, if you will, continue to notice that the elections are being pulled off really, really well and at a high degree of excellence. And but let's turn our attention and just say a few more things about voter confidence in general. In 2022, we asked, as we have in these other years, how confident are you that not only was your vote counted as intended, but votes in your county, your city, in your state, or votes nationwide? And as this graph indicates, that the further away from the voter one gets, the less confident voters are overall about the conduct of the election. Although even nationwide, which is the most removed from voters, still almost 70% of voters in 2022 said that they were either very or somewhat confident that votes nationwide were counted as they were intended. Now, we all know that there's been a growing partisan divide in answers about voter confidence. One of the things I should note is that this divide, while it has grown a little bit in recent years at the local level, when we look at Democrats and Republicans and how confident they are in local election administration, we see what is known in political science and has been known for decades as the winner and loser effect, that when your party wins, you tend to think better of the process than when your party loses. Nonetheless, in recent years, as Republicans, for instance, have lost, say the 2020 election, the degree of dissatisfaction among Republicans basically dropped back down to where it had been in 2012, the last time a Republican presidential candidate had lost. So these gaps, these partisan gaps at the local level are kind of within scope of what we've seen in the recent past in prior elections before we were worried, for instance, about election denialism. However, when we get further and further away from the voters' experience and voters are listening to not their own experience, but that of neighbors or the media or political candidates through the media, we see increasingly great divides. When we ask people about, for instance, do they trust elections in their state, a big divide. And then when we ask, do you trust elections nationwide, the election nationwide, there's about a 50-point gap in 2020 in the partisan gap over trust in the election outcome. That 50-point gap, by the way, being a narrowing of the gap from what it was in 2020. Okay, so to return to the state level trust, one of the important things to understand about trust of the voters in the process is to return back to this kind of winner and loser effect. If we had looked state by state in 2016, we would have seen that in red states, Republicans were happier than Democrats. In blue states, Democrats were happier than Republicans. In purple states, it was kind of a mix. And that's what this graph shows. It's a hard graph to read. The important thing to note, what this graph shows is for every state, the blue dot is how confident Democrats were about elections in the state, and the red dot is how confident Republicans were. So this is 2016. The states at the top where Republicans are more confident are the red states. States at the bottom where the Democrats are more confident are the blue states. Okay. 2020 was different from anything that I've ever seen, in which everywhere Democrats were more confident than Republicans, and oftentimes by a big margin. And where was the gap the widest? Well, the gap was at the bottom of this graph, and the states at the bottom of the graph were, first of all, battleground states where Donald Trump lost narrowly, like Arizona, Georgia, Nevada, and states that had all-mail elections. And you put these two things together, the all-mail elections plus Donald Trump losing was really kind of a toxic mix in 2020. In 2022, the gap has shrunk in most states. So this partisan gap has shrunk in most states, with a couple of exceptions. And these are very important exceptions and help us to focus on where things may be worse for election officials than in some other states. For instance, there are still some of the battleground states that were barely lost by Donald Trump. Pennsylvania and Arizona particularly stand out in this regard. And still in states with all male elections, there still is this big divide. Now, one of the things I just want to stop here in talking about voter confidence, given the challenges that election officials are facing these days, but also given the politics around election reform in the states, oftentimes there's a focus on this issue of trust and levels of trust. While overall trust in elections is down in 2022 and 2020 than say in 2016, and there is a gap between the parties, the gap is not out of scope in terms of what we've seen historically. So the issue is the issue in terms of the nastiness that election officials are living through is not so much, and this might be splitting hairs, but I think it's an important thing that we see in the public opinion work that we and other people have done, that the issue is not so much a matter of trust, but it's a matter of two other things. One is anger over results, and secondly, the creation of organizations that are grifting off the distrust. If it were simply a matter of distrust, eventually probably things would equilibrate back. But now we have a different thing. And that is we have people in civil society who are not only fomenting distrust, but finding people who are particularly angry about elections, are going out in the hustings, are having seminars where they're convincing people that they should be angry and that they should act on that anger. And by the way, buy my pillow or my book out in the lobby. So that's one of the ways in which the environment, the public opinion environment has really changed. Now, I will end by kind of shifting and note that, election officials are dealing with a lot. And we've talked about not only what they're dealing with so far in these two sessions, but their reactions to the the general kind of public opinion setting. One of the things that hasn't been talked about so much today, but I know is going to be talked about later on, is what election officials are doing to demonstrate to the public that they are in fact securing elections and making them secure and trustworthy. For the first time in 2022, we asked respondents to the SPAE whether they knew about various very common activities that election officials undertake in order to make elections more trustworthy, ranging from logic and accuracy testing, nonpartisan poll workers, to wargaming out and tabletop exercises dealing with cyber threats. One of the things we discovered in the survey is that voters actually don't know about these things. About 40% of voters say they claim they know, and there are reasons actually to doubt whether they really know, but only 40% claim they know that election officials conduct logic and accuracy testing. And that is the most common thing that they claim they know. All these other things, like making sure there's a chain of custody for ballots, having nonpartisan and partisan poll watchers, prosecuting fraud, election fraud, these are things that voters don't know about. However, when we ask them which of these would increase your confidence in election outcomes, all of them would increase confidence, but particularly the most common of the activities, like logic and accuracy testing and securing paper ballots, etc. So here's, I would say, a piece of good news, another piece of good news from the public opinion work in the SPIE. Not only are election officials, or rather voters, confident that their vote was counted, confident in elections as they observe them, that they are ripe for learning about what election officials are doing systematically to make sure that the system is secure. And on that, I will end there, and yeah, I'll end there, and I'm happy to engage in the Q&A and discussion.
That was the cue, Charles.
That was Neil.
Charles, thank you so much. I had the honor of serving with Charles for nearly a year on the National Academy of Sciences Voting Committee and have learned so much from you throughout the years. So thank you so much. We have a ton of good questions, and I was told I could eat a little bit into the break. Don't shoot the messenger, but we'll do that because I think these are excellent questions to get to. And before we get to some individual questions, I have a question for all of you. And that is based on what you've said or what you've heard your colleagues say this morning. What items or item would you prioritize that we should focus our attention on, and why? And I'd love to start with Amy, and we'll go to Paul and then Charles.
So I don't know exactly who we is in this scenario, but I will say false information for me is the top issue, because we're seeing it permeate literally everything, right? We see that in the results of Paul's survey. We see that in the results of Charles's survey. And it is sort of an intractable problem because, I said election officials don't have the loudest megaphone. I think you see that very, very clearly in the last slide that Charles showed before he caused me to leap out of my skin. Election officials are doing what they can to message a lot of this stuff and to promote themselves as experts and their offices as the source for accurate, reliable, trustworthy information about elections. But no one is listening to us. No one is listening. And that is a very difficult problem to solve. And so if anyone has ideas, I think we're all sort of open to that. But for me, that is just the absolute number one challenge, because it is impacting the way voters experience elections and think about elections. And it is impacting the way election officials experience their jobs and administer their jobs and the policy frameworks that surround them.
Awesome. Thank you, Amy. And the clarification of we is the election community. So that's my thought there. Paul.
Well, that's good, Neil. I was going to give a two-part answer. So I'll speak to my own community, frankly. This is happening, I think, election administration and the scholarly work needs to penetrate more deeply across different disciplines. It primarily has a presence in political science, some in public administration, but it needs to appear in the computer science textbook, the stats books. Charles and others, we need to do that hard work so that students are just exposed to this area of study. You open up a computer science or stats book and you'll find lots of examples, and election examples aren't there yet. And we need to mainstream this work just so people see it. Related to that, I guess would say on the work that we've been doing, I think one of the areas where work can be done is, I guess I would say at the mid-level hiring area. What we found in our work in Oregon, as well as I expect we're going to be asking the survey in the next month, is that folks don't know what the benefits are of working in this space. They only know what the negatives are. And what we found, for example, in Oregon is that literally the benefits, meaning the non-salary benefits, young folks just don't know that. And to the degree that the positive aspects of the job can be conveyed, the excitement that the change is a good thing, the kind of just the engagement with the community, I think, we have to make sure that people see this as an attractive career path.
Excellent. Thank you, Paul. Charles.
Thanks. I support what my two colleagues have said. I guess in terms of prioritizing, my sense right now, I what Amy said at the beginning of her answer about mis and disinformation as being kind of the big thing. I hear that a lot, and I believe it. It's true. I mean, it is totally true. The challenge is that we don't know what works, if anything. And in fact, I think I'm coming to the view as I read the political science and communications work, not only in elections, but in other areas that share with elections, in public health, in public safety, in climate change. It's not just elections where minds are hard to change. And intuitive strategies to try to deal with that oftentimes backfire. And so one priority is just to understand what we need to be doing and get better at it. Having said, the priority then becomes what we do know is that a bad election, those few voters who have a bad experience don't trust elections. Those 1, 2, 3, 4% don't trust elections. And so I would come around. I know it's hard. I know it's demoralizing to be under the assault right now in many places. But what election officials have under their control more often than not is how well the election is run. And the blocking and tackling of elections is the one thing that election officials are good at doing. And getting better at doing that is something under the control of election officials. And so I would encourage continuing to prioritize running really good elections. And let's figure out together how we get this communications thing down.
Excellent responses from all three. Thank you. We're going to end here with just a dip into the break with a question for each of you. And I'll start off with Amy. We don't talk enough, I think, about mental health in this country for a variety of reasons. Unfairly, the stigma, I think, associated with that. You talked about the exhaust that your members are feeling, being exhausted. What are members saying about their mental health, or I'll use the term from Tammy, their soul?
I'm glad you asked because I really liked the way Tammy phrased that, and I guess Weber County phrased that. Here's what I'll say. In 2021, at one of our virtual conferences, we did a session on mental health, and I invited a psychiatrist from the Defense Health Agency. So from the federal government, works with the Department of Defense. And I was very nervous about this. I said at the beginning, I tend to think of my members as elections robots. And so I tend to think of myself as an elections robot also. And so thinking about mental health in a professional context was very strange for me. And so I was really nervous about how it was going to go. And within 10 minutes, I was getting texts and messages from my members about how this was the best thing at the entire conference, because this is a huge issue. And I know that gentleman, this is not his job, but he went like around the country doing this. So we are seeing more prioritizing, I think, of mental health in election offices because people are realizing more what it means. That doesn't always translate into direct action because I think people don't know how to support their colleagues through some of this stuff. They don't know how to support themselves through some of this stuff. And it is a place where I think that professional associations can play a role, is helping to bring these resources to election officials, because it's not just about what an individual is experiencing, it's helping manage staff who are experiencing problems. And the gentleman we brought in from the Defense Health Agency he talked about, we're not alone. Charles references also, we're not alone. This happens a lot in a lot of other fields, but it's about sort of getting back on the field and continuing to play, because election officials don't have the opportunity or the option. If we're going to stay in this field, we don't have the option to sit out an election, and there are elections every Tuesday. So I think we're seeing more people prioritize it, but figuring out what prioritizing means and how to put that into action is a challenge. And frankly, I think a place where associations can play a pretty significant role.
Awesome. Thank you, Amy. Paul, great. Kudos to you and your team for the work you're doing on the satisfaction surveys and all the data around that. And you made a point earlier about young people looking at this profession and how do we attract them into this industry? And so one question came in, which I thought was great, is how does job satisfaction compare to past years? And is there a trend line that you're seeing within those satisfaction surveys?
Yeah, not great. There's some erosion. We have a series, my colleague Paul Manson, who has a public administration degree, adapted a set of workforce job satisfaction questions that we've put into the instrument, as well as an overall. Many have heard me present on these data before. Election officials are frustrating because you get them aside in a room or as Amy said, in small group settings, which actually we're doing more of that kind of work, Neil, because it really is valuable, and the officials will open up in a way that oddly enough they won't in a confidential survey instrument. But I call it the stiff upper lip sort of responses. Yes, we can do it. We can get it done. They will not describe to us pain points. So we're trying to ask the questions in different ways so officials will tell us. So overall job satisfaction remains high, but for example, the number of percentage who will say that they would encourage their child to go into the profession, which is one of those sneaky little questions, has declined. And so there are the number of people who are willing to report pain points, stressors, other difficulties in the profession has increased. We've also been tracking the hours and just to work, and that's been increasing as well. The number of officials just say, the work. So we're seeing cracks in the armor, and you're a tough armored profession. Believe me, folks, this is a tough armored profession, but we've got to figure out where those cracks are so that we can help out.
Excellent insight. Thank you, Paul. Charles, you're gonna have the last word with the last question, two-part question. And kudos again to you for the survey work that you do. I don't know an election official in the country that doesn't use it at some point throughout their career. How did you decide on 200 surveys is part one? And are there efforts to expand or any interest in expanding the survey size?
Yeah, I mean, wow, very geeky questions. I'm more than happy to email with whoever asked the questions. cstewart@mit.edu. 200 was chosen so that it's kind of the right size that if you do have big effects across states that you can actually measure them. So and then when you roll up from 200, you have 10,000, 200 per state plus DC, you have 10,200, which ends up being a really large and therefore expensive survey. So the number was trading off sample size and cost of doing the survey. 200 is a good number if there's a big difference between states, and that was what was driving it. If someone wants to give me more money for bigger samples, I will do that. In 2020, in fact, I did, where we had sample sizes of 1,000 in 9 of the battleground states. So $16 an interview. The price.
Yeah, excellent. Sorry, we couldn't get to all the questions. We had some great ones coming in, and I do want to extend my thanks to Amy, Paul, and Charles for your excellent insights, and a debt of gratitude to Larry and Judd and the Humphrey School for all of the work that you're doing in this amazing conference. Thank you again, and be back at the top of the hour, 12 Central, 1 Eastern, 10 Pacific, or excuse me, 11 Pacific. No, 10 Pacific. Thank you very much.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back after a short break. My name is Ashley Kwaku. I'm the Executive Director of the Election Trust Initiative. We are a nonpartisan organization that works with election officials, with researchers, policymakers, and nonprofits to support the field of election administration. And in particular, we're focused on how we can strengthen the infrastructure that supports election officials in their critical work of securing and safeguarding our elections. I'm really delighted to be here. Thanks to the Humphrey School for inviting me to participate in this conversation. And particularly, I'm delighted to facilitate this discussion on state associations, which I think we've all come to understand through the course of this morning's discussions are a critical piece of this field infrastructure for election administration. There are state associations of election officials in most states. I think about 47 states have them, but they vary significantly, I think, as we heard from Tammy Patrick earlier, in terms of their structure, their capacity, their resources, and their impact. And so we have the opportunity today, I think, to hear from three leaders of some of the most well-established state associations. And through their experiences, we can really see the power that these structures have in terms of supporting election officials and supporting their work. And I think after the sessions this morning, we need some good stories about what we can do to lift up the sort of beleaguered state of our election official cadre. But we've heard about state associations as this vital connective tissue across their members, the work they do in terms of professionalization and training for the workforce, the work that they do on policy and advocacy, the spaces that they create for sharing of resources and tools. And so I think we'll have a wonderful opportunity to have a conversation with three leaders today who can help us understand how these associations work, why they're able to be as successful as they are in terms of supporting the professionalization of the election workforce. So very quickly, we have at the far end of to my left is Matt Crane, who is the executive director of the Colorado County Clerks Association. Next to Matt, we have Amy Farrington, who is the executive director of the Florida Supervisor of Elections. And then up on the screen, we have Sherry Poland from who's president of the Ohio Association of Election Officials. So thanks to all of you for participating and welcome to the conversation. Just a reminder, if you're joining, please do submit questions on the chat or in the room. We'll have some chance for Q&A at the end of these initial comments. So Sherry, I'd love to start with you if I could. Tell us a bit about the Ohio Association of Election Officials. What are the features that make it strong and effective, and also how you're approaching the professional development of your members?
Sure, absolutely. I'm honored to virtually be here with all of you today. I apologize for not being able to appear in person, as we just held an election last week in Ohio, so we're now working towards certification. I'd like to begin by describing the bipartisan structure of boards of elections in the state of Ohio. Every county in the state has a board of elections. The Secretary of State is the chief elections official in the state. The members of the county board of elections are appointed by the Secretary of State, and each county's board of elections has 4 members. 2 are members of the local Democratic Party and 2 are members of the local Republican Party. Each board then appoints a director and a deputy director, who are also of opposite political parties, along with a full-time staff and a seasonal staff. The director and deputy director are responsible for the day-to-day operations of the board, and each board is responsible for all local, state, and federal elections that occur within their county. The Ohio Association of Elections Officials is also a bipartisan organization, also known as the OAEO, because we know we all love our acronyms in the world of elections. The OAEO was formed in 1949. So we will proudly celebrate our 75th anniversary next year. The OAEO represents Ohio's 88 county boards of elections and their staff members. Our mission is to promote fair, accurate, and reliable elections through the education of our members, advocating for sound election policies, and communicating accurate information regarding the administration of elections. How do we accomplish this mission? Well, it really begins with a welcome packet that is sent to all newly appointed election officials, basically introducing them to the association and our various programs. We offer a 2-day annual conference every January of each year, featuring educational sessions, guest speakers, and the opportunity, of course, to network. The OAO also hosts 1-day regional meetings during the summer months. Our members are actually divided into 5 different regions. We find that there's sort of just natural similarities in partnerships that tend to arise within geographical regions. We also have a mentorship program. We've partnered with the Ohio Secretary of State to develop peer-to-peer relationships among newly appointed election officials and sort of match them with more experienced election officials so they can share best practices with them. The OAO also partnered with the Ohio State University to develop a continuing education and professional development program that is called the Ohio Registered Election Official Program. For the most part, the courses are co-taught between OSU professors and experienced election administrators. There's 8 courses that are required for certification. And we offer those courses sort of a combination of some are online, some are in person, but we offer them in conjunction with our winter conference and then also the Secretary of State summer conference. So election officials could complete certification within 2 years. After certification, election officials have the opportunity to take advanced learning courses, and they are required to take at least 1 graduate course every 3 years in order to maintain their certification. This program has been extremely popular. Out of 77 of the 88 counties in Ohio have participated in at least 1 course over the last 4 years. So, and in addition to these programs, the OAO also lobbies, as I mentioned before, for sound election policy. And we actually have a strong voice in the General Assembly in Ohio. In 2011, the association took the wise step of hiring an executive director, Aaron Ackerman, who's still our executive director today. And Director Ackerman guides the association through all of those programs that I mentioned before. And then he also lobbies the state legislature on behalf of the association. He's been an incredible asset to the OAO, and I would highly recommend associations hire an executive director, especially such an effective director as Aaron has been. As I mentioned earlier, just as the local boards of elections are bipartisan organizations, bipartisanship is really the cornerstone of the OAO. We are governed by a board of trustees that consists of 20 members, 10 Democrats, 10 Republicans. Our leadership alternates every other year between a Democrat and a Republican serving as president and first vice president. Our committees all have equal representation amongst the 2 political parties. I think that, it's often said in Ohio that boards of elections are a place where Democrats and Republicans still come together to do the people's work. And that's no different in our association. And yes, it is challenging at times, but I also think our bipartisan makeup has led to so many of our successes. In addition to the robust educational programs we've created, we have effectively lobbied for sensible election policies. And I think a lot of that has to do again, with our bipartisan nature, when we come to the General Assembly, we're able to say, this is the recommendation of your bipartisan election officials. Just to name a few of some of our successes that we've lobbied for is online voter registration, the funding for our inaugural rollout of electronic poll books. We were able to change in-person early voting laws in Ohio to mirror that of in-person voting on election day, which made the process much quicker, easier for voters, and really took lessen some of the burden for election officials. We proactively secured funding to upgrade our voting equipment and voting systems prior to the 2020 presidential election. Again, this is all state funded. I shouldn't say it's all. The counties did bear some of the expense, but the state did provide the majority of the funding. And then we just recently, just this year, secured additional funding to upgrade our electronic poll books. So I am very grateful to those who came before me in the association and those that I currently serve with to build such a strong association. The benefits to election administration have been many. Just to summarize, we are a clearinghouse for sharing of best practices, news, developments. We represent the election officials' interests to our state legislature. We administer comprehensive and convenient training programs, and we promote a sense of community that is so needed within a profession that's come under so much tremendous pressure that's been discussed earlier here today. So for all of those reasons, I encourage states to form strong associations, and I'll be happy to answer any questions once we get to that point in the program.
Thank you so much for that really comprehensive overview of Ohio. And I think we can all see from all of the aspects that Sherry mentioned about the executive director, the bipartisanship sort of core features of this association that's helped it be so successful. So thank you for that. Amy, I'd love to talk about Florida a bit, because you also have a very well-established training and certification program. So can you tell us a bit about your association, how you support your members, and about your training program?
Sure. Thank you. And I'll say, just listening to Sherry, a lot of those things that she was saying, I was thinking, oh, we do that too. We do that too. So you'll see trends, I think, in the associations, like, that work for everybody, and some things just work for some states. And so that's an important part, I think, of elections anywhere, is to share the ideas and reach out and see what you like about what others are doing. So in Florida, we have the Florida Supervisors of Elections. It's a 501c6. It was incorporated in 1964. So we are celebrating our 60th year next year during the 2024 election cycle. But I think it was in about 2000 that supervisors in Florida found a real need to strengthen and professionalize what they do. I mean, they still had something before then, of course, but that was when I think it really started to take the shape that it is in now. And so to give you an idea, in Florida, we have 67 counties. They range from registered voters from 4,400 to 1.5 million in Miami-Dade. So we, just like everybody else, I think all the other states, we have like the little rural ones that have like one person working in the office. Then we have Miami-Dade that has, probably hundreds working in their office. And geographically, we're just as challenged as every other state. In Monroe County, which is where the keys are at, it takes them 3 hours to get from one end of the county to the other. And so you can imagine for election day, some of the logistical challenges that brings. Are the structure of our organization. We have elected officers. They're elected by the members of the association. Our members are our 67 supervisors of elections. They are elected in Florida. They run, I think somebody mentioned it earlier, all of the elections, but that's what they do. They don't do the recording that others do. They don't do some of that other stuff. They do everything from voter registration straight through, audit, certification. So we have 6 officers that are elected by their members. Generally, they progress through. So if you start as treasurer, you'll be, secretary, you'll be so that by the time you're president, you have a really good idea of how the association works and what the needs are. And there's that consistency, I think, over time, which is really important. And then we hang on to them one more year. We have a past president that we make hang out with us for a little bit longer, because they're a real good source of information, having gone through everything. Because it can be a difficult position to be an officer in these organizations. It's a lot of work at times. So followed by that, we have a board of directors. We have 10 members of our board of directors. They are broken out by region. So we have 10 districts in the state of Florida, and they select their own board of directors. So that's who's representing their region. And beyond that, we have, standing committees that are appointed by the president. We have special committees if we need it. One of the unique things that we do that I think is very effective is we have county working groups. And so we break counties up by registered voters. And so small counties get together, a couple times a year, and they talk about the particular issues that they are having, and medium and large counties, because it can be different. But it's important that they all come in the room at the same time, a couple times a year as well, because a lot of them, we're all facing the same challenges. Our legislature just ended on Friday. And so we're still working through some of that. And no matter if you're a small county or a big county, if, vote by mail changes, well, everybody has to change it. And so we'll work through that as a group. In terms of staff, I'm the staff. I'm actually contracted, so that it's not an employee kind of position, and that's what it was before me. Before me, we had the same executive director who also served as general counsel, and then also as lobbyist for a period of time. And then we've since started to work with the lobbyist, and we still have him, the last executive director, on as a general counsel. So the nice thing I think you see in elections, even though we're talking about people leaving the field, is when there's that history, like a lot of people have been in it for a long time. And so that's really helpful to be able to have, this is why we did it that way, and that's why we're going to do it, a different way. Kind of going along with what Sherry said in terms of her mission, Florida has really strong core values, and I think they hold true to it every meeting they have, every discussion they have, and they focus around ethics, integrity, professionalism, and communication. We have a really strong ethics program. Some of it's required by the state, but it's in all of our core values. It's in even our certification program. It's in their core values. You may not have seen it on the slide, but one of the 30 courses that we teach is on ethics. And so I think that's really important to continue that in terms of a level of professionalism. So when I was asked to come do this, and then Ashley sent out some questions, I actually asked the members, why is Florida successful? Like, first of all, we've been around a long time, which is helpful, but why do we do it so well? And what have Florida supervisors of elections added to the industry in terms of professionalism? And so lots of feedback back. One of the key things that they talked about, and Sherry talked about it a little bit too, is as soon as a supervisor is elected, we do a new supervisor orientation. We set them up with a mentor. We bring them along. A lot of times it is staff that have come up through the ranks that run for the office and, step up into supervisor. That's a very different role than what they would have been in staff. And so we make sure that they have the support and the information that they need to start out successfully. Beyond that, we do have you guys have all heard about it today. We have the Florida Certified Elections Professional program that we started talking about in 2005. We worked with a local university in Southwest Florida, the Florida Gulf Coast University at the time, to get it started. It took 4 years to get it off the ground. They did a lot of research. What would be needed? What is it going to look like? A lot of our supervisors of elections are SARA certified, which is a wonderful program. And so this is kind of a supplement to that for Florida. And so it's Florida centric. It's a little more broad-based in terms of being able to send staff. Right now we have, I think, 841 participants that have either gone through or are in it. 254 have graduated. We do require recertification on an annual basis. And so they have, courses that they can choose from, and we add to new ones this year. I think we're going to do one on the legislative process. So now, in order to do that, we moved from FGCU to Florida State University. So we do have a really strong partnership with the Florida Institute of Government at FSU, all those acronyms. And so they help us put on this program and make sure the learning objectives are what they need to be, to make sure that the speakers are the level that we need them to be at. And so it's been a really great partnership. We get a lot of feedback from participants on we did a focus group at the 10-year anniversary on what they found useful. Like, we can think about what we find useful, but what are they really finding out? And so those focus groups came back to say that it gave them a really good idea of the big picture of elections, because a lot of times in offices, depending on what you are, if you're a little county, you know the big picture because you do every single thing. But if you just did voter registration, sometimes you don't know why vote by mail is what it is. And so I think it gives them a bigger sense of team and a bigger idea of the picture of elections. Quite a few of them said it gave them a better sense of pride in the work that they do, and then the work that their team members do. And then one of the things, and we've talked about this quite a lot, community and networking, and it gives them strength. It strengthens their relationships outside the office. So they can, if they work in vote by mail, they have their peers that work in vote by mail that they can call and ask questions about, or that don't work in vote by mail that they can still call and touch base with. And so I think it gives them a sense of being a larger team than just is in their office. And sorry, I have to have notes. So I think that's it for Florida in terms of, I said how many graduates we have. And so that's been a really successful program. We're currently looking at how to better reach more people. We're doing regional workshops for them, but we also do all similar things like what Sherry was talking about, conferences and regional workshops. And we're starting to do more online kind of workshops, things that people just can't quite get there in person, but for a 1 hour, something kind of cybersecurity update, like sometimes we'll just jump on and do something like that. So that's what we're looking to do in the near future.
Great. Thank you so much, Amy. And I think, your comments really, I think, helped us kind of remember some of what we heard this morning about how election officials not only need the skills-based information in terms of training, but they need this, I forget how Weber University described it, the soul or the emotional and mental support. And I think you're really articulating both what they're getting in terms of the certification, but then what they get from their peers in terms of that, that support of just having someone who's walking the road along with you and who knows what you're dealing with, on a whole variety of issues. So that's great. Matt, we'd love to hear as well about Colorado. We had a little bit of bragging from Judd earlier about how great the Colorado Association is and how effective you are, more effective than him, it turns out. And so really interested to hear how you see your association having most impact for its members. And I think also you have a unique perspective on how members look at professionalization from a variety of perspectives, even in terms of holding each other accountable.
Well, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. And thanks to Larry and Judd for the invitation to be here today. This is such an important conversation. And I think, especially since 2020, we've really seen how associations can really help fill the gap for some of the craziness that's happened. So I was feeling really good about representing my association here. I thought we were doing really well. We are 54 years old, and I come to find out I'm the baby in the group. So it's very cool though. But I think one of the things that's important too is with all three associations, there's a long history of demonstrated cooperation and bipartisanship, nonpartisanship in the approach to this. And I think that's something that I hear from Sherry and Amy is, that is so important in terms of having a good association, and more importantly, an effective association in terms of its supporting its members, whether it's through education or legislation, communication, across the board. So very much like my colleagues in Ohio and Florida, we have an executive director. We started, I think, in 2009 with an executive director. We were very fortunate that Danetta Davidson, so for those of you who've been around for a long time, she's pretty much a goddess in the election world. She was former Secretary of State, clerk in 2 counties, former EAC commissioner. So she was our first executive director. And then the amazing Pam Anderson followed Danetta. And then I'm our third executive director. So I have huge shoes to fill, to say the very least. We also have 2 other contract employees. We have a lobbyist that works for us. And then we have somebody that helps us with conference support. So we really focus on a lot of the same things education and training first and foremost of our members. That's first and foremost. We're a little bit different than Ohio and Florida. In Colorado, the certification program is actually run by the state, by Judd and his team, and they do a fantastic job. I will say, and I'll probably say this a lot through the presentation today, one of the things that helps make us so successful, and our association does get a lot of credit, but it really is because we have a great relationship with our friends at the state. And I think, we have a core group that's been there for a long time, whether at the state level or at the county level. Elected officials come and go. We all know that. But it's the staff, the cadre of staff that's been there for a long time. And I can tell you, I worked my way up, like you said, a lot of your members, where I worked my way up as staff, then became the elected clerk in Arapahoe. And, I can tell you whether I was elected or staff, junior staff, my relationship with Judd was always the same, always very direct. We agree sometimes, we disagree sometimes, but always friends. And always we know that we have the same approach to making sure that we run accessible and secure elections. And so that's a big part of what makes us successful. We have 2 conferences a year. We have a winter and a summer conference for all of our members. And then much like my colleagues, our state is broken up into 4 different regions. So those regions will also meet twice a year. So there's a lot of chance for us to connect as a group and then in the regions. The regions tend to be based on size. In Colorado, most of our larger jurisdictions are right in the center in our central region. The rest of our regions, it's mostly rural. We do a great job of staying nonpartisan, although there will be flare-ups from time to time, and we allow people their space to do that. We also see divides between rural and urban areas too, in terms of what they need and how prescriptive they want the law to be. We tend to see in the urban areas, those folks want more prescription in the law, whereas in the rural areas, they're like, we know how to do our jobs and let us do it. This is what the people elected us to do. So there's always that kind of friction, but for the most part, everybody's able to come together and move forward on things that we can all agree on. I think, one of the things we've heard a lot, the importance of these of associations is the connectivity that it provides to its members. Coming through COVID in 2020, where we didn't have a chance to get together, and it also coincided with, perhaps the most challenging election that we've seen, not being able to get together in person with your colleagues and be able to talk about best practices, or just quite frankly sit at the bar and talk about the crazy that happened. That was something that was really missing. And so, now that we're back in full swing, I think that's a great thing to be able to do. The other thing we've started doing since 2020, and I know this is common throughout the country, is you'll say, okay, well, I'll have election officials in my state say, I know in Colorado we're good, but man, what happened in Georgia? Or holy moly, what is going on in Maricopa? And so the first thing I try to remind people is, first of all, don't criticize an election official when you know nothing about their processes or anything like that. You hate when people do that to you, so have the respect to your colleagues across the country. But one of the things we've tried to do then at our conferences is start what we call our Election Hero series. To where last summer we brought in Bill Gates from Maricopa so that election officials could hear directly from the source what happened in Maricopa. And Bill was fantastic. It was an incredibly moving presentation. There were laughs, there were tears. I mean, it was just incredible. This summer, we're really excited. We have Gabe Sterling from Georgia coming in, and then Secretary Benson from Michigan coming in, because it's so important not just to build a connectivity in state, but with our colleagues across the country too, to create those relationships, right? So if something comes up, I know, one of my dear friends, she worked for me in Arapahoe, she's in Mesa County now, Stephanie Winholtz, she has formed a relationship with Bill. Well, they keep in touch now because, they created and they were able to bond at our conference over very difficult circumstances. So I think that's important to help people learn and grow, not just in our states, but across the country. As Judd mentioned, we do a lot with legislative advocacy. Like with all of you, sometimes it's playing offense, sometimes it's playing defense. Examples of where we've been effective playing offense, I think back in 2013 with our House Bill 1303, which, the initial bill was to do same-day voter registration in precinct polling places, and the association leadership at the time stepped in and said, okay, that's going to be untenable, but let's see what we can do. And that's how we came up with our mail ballot delivery model, same-day voter registration with vote centers. So it was through the advocacy of the Clerks Association that we were able to come up with that model. I think just this year, we've passed a bill that's modernized the way that we fund our elections, where, you know, before this year, the state reimbursed counties about 20% of the election cost, and we were able to move that forward to 45% of election costs. So we can be very effective, especially when we're all behind the cause. And then sometimes it is playing defense, right? Whether it's somebody trying to say we should go back to the Stone Age and, you know, throw stones in jars to be able to count ballots. So there's always work, always offense and defense. But the great thing is when people are moving uniformly together, it makes that fight a lot easier. Communication support, we provide a lot of communication support to our folks, which was really important after 2020. And again, what was happening, not just in other parts of the country, but in certain counties in Colorado. Judd alluded to this before, but we had the unfortunate election security breach in Mesa County with the clerk there. So being able to provide communication support to our folks, what is happening? What do you guys need to know? Of course, you know, once you have one that does something unethical, potentially illegal, certainly violating their oath, there's going to be pressure on other clerks to do the same thing. I know so many of you know what I'm talking about with that. So it was important to be a backstop, provide information to our folks, allow them to call in and say, hey, what's happening? What can we do? What happened here? What did she do here? So we were able to gather that information, get talking points out on a regular basis about what we were going on and what we were hearing. And I think we were effective at that, quite frankly, because in some of the chatter we saw online, I don't think they expected the type of resistance that they got from clerks. And a lot of it was because of the work of the executive board at the association pushing back on that, to the point where they started, as Judd said, they started finding other ways to try to get changes they want. When they found they couldn't lean on clerks, they started going to the Board of County Commissioners to try to mess with contracts. So one of the things we did last year, we partnered with Judd and his team and the secretary and her team and passed a bill that said, you know, you have to use voting equipment to be able to tabulate votes. So we're able to be very agile as well, which helps us be super effective. And then there's things where we try to really focus on improvement. One of the things after 2020 that just drove everybody nuts was when somebody would go to them and say, oh, you have a Kraken in your voting system. And we have an election official that says, no, that's not true. And this is why. And they go through all the reasons. You know, that person would go out and say, oh, I went to the clerks. And they say, there's nothing to see here. And they don't care about election integrity. So we were more aggressive after 2020 in coming up with an agenda around election integrity and being very vocal about it, going to the media about it, doing that, things like improving our signature verification audits, looking at voter registration audits. The funding was a big piece. Ultimately, the group decided we'd like to put cast vote records and ballot images online for free after each election. I know that's Matt Masterson's favorite piece to that one. But we were very aggressive. So we formed a committee around that with election experts in the state, including Judd and some national folks, including Jen, including Matt, to come together to talk about best practices to be able to get this done. And then the other thing we're looking at, so after the Tina Peters disgrace and the fiasco in Mesa County and the pressure that got put on our folks, one of the things that we're looking at is how can we better protect our election officials and give them the tools that they need. And part of that has to come with voter education and outreach too. So it's not just the communication that we're doing internally with our members, but it's what we're trying to push out externally to voters in Colorado. One of the things that we are looking at trying to, we're in the very early stages of it, but trying to get off the ground is, we've talked about the certification program that we do for election officials. Well, we would love to have a certification program for the public. So the idea behind this is to educate voters about what we do. If they sign up, part of it will be classwork. We'd like to have online components to it. Part of it will be taking a tour of your election facility, serving as an election judge, all of these things to help build a better awareness about what really happens in our elections. the idea as well is, you know, to incentivize it, if you go through this, you can potentially get a higher wage as an election judge, right? But really try to go out and spread the gospel about what we do. You know, in elections, why our elections are good, where we have room to improve, and just be open and honest in that with that. But it has to be more going out, an aggressive move out into the public. And, you know, our members think that we are suited well to be able to go out and do that, and having the association behind it will give it more resources, access to materials, all that kind of thing. So kind of a basic high overview of where we're at. Sounds like we're very similar to Ohio and Florida. So happy to take any questions, and thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Matt. And thank you to all of the panelists. I think, you know, the three of them make it kind of look easy in the sense of all of the things that they're providing to their members. But as I sort of said at the top, most, you know, even though most states have an association, very few of them are doing what you're doing. I'm curious, you know, what advice would you give to the more nascent, smaller, less developed, you know, peers of yours around the country? And I think that one question I think I'm going to add to this is, especially because you have this decades-long history and a history of bipartisanship, it sounds like in all cases. How do you think about an association that is looking to build that kind of cooperation in the kind of partisan environment that we find ourselves in today? Anybody who wants to jump in?
I'll go first. So the advice, I kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but the advice that I would give is, I mean, when we go around and see these things and see what other people are doing, I mean, often, like, I wrote down a couple of ideas from Matt that I'll take back and see, you know, kind of talk to our members about it. But I think one of the things that I would suggest is for those that you know, have an association or are looking to take it to the next step is, you know, reach out to associations that are where you want to be, or, you know, a couple steps ahead of where you are, because we're happy to share. I mean, I get calls all the time about our new supervisor orientation, and I'm happy to share that information. The other thing, I think that one of the reasons FSE has been really successful is they have focused on their core values throughout, and they define those early on, and they hold true to them no matter what they're doing. And so I think that that's really important to define, like, who do you want to be when you grow up, and put some words to the paper. So I think that would be helpful. The other thing I would say is that for Florida, our members really run the organization. Like, I'm happy to be there and help shepherd everything along and implement the policies that they want, but there's ownership in this, and this is their association. They created it. They've made it what it is. And I think that that's a big part of it, because for us, it's voluntary. Nobody has to join there. You can if you want. But we have almost always had all 67 there. So I think that that's been a really important part of it, is that I'm not convincing anybody to do anything. Like, I'm trying to hold them back because it's so much stuff going on. But I think that's an important part of it. And the other thing is to have a plan. Like, I think it takes time to think about where FSC was before the 2000 election, and then where they were, you know, 5, 10 now later. It has taken a bit of time and planning.
Right. No?
I think that's right. I think another factor with it is patience, because it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take some time. But I think when you look at models that have been successful, you know, there's no question that the juice is worth the squeeze in terms of putting in the time to get it done. And it can be very hard, especially for rural and smaller counties, because, as we've heard so many times today, they don't have the resources. They have a few people in the office. But I think when they see that it really expands their access to personnel support, because we have counties all the time say, oh my gosh, I'm in a backlog in motor vehicle. Can you send people down? Absolutely, we'll send them down. So you can provide personnel support and all kinds of other support, whether it's another eye to look at statute or to try to figure out what this means. So I think it is patience, but it has to be a shared commitment, you know, as Amy was saying, to certain fundamental principles, which are, you know, bipartisanship. You have to give people space to be who they are, allow for disagreement, but at the end of the day, this is who we are. You have your mission statement, whatever that is. This is what we're always going to come back to. And then we can go out and do a lot more things together than we can individually. And I think that's the thing, even when we have some people who are frustrated because let's say they want a certain thing done at the legislature, and there's just no appetite to have that happen. And they're like, well, why am I doing this? And then you stop and realize, okay, well, I didn't get this one piece, but look at this long list of other things I never would have gotten without this joint commitment to move forward together. So I just, patience and, a commitment to what you're trying to do. I think that's where it's at.
Sherry, anything additionally to add?
Oh, I wholeheartedly agree with both Amy and Matt on their comments. I think another suggestion I would throw out is perhaps getting together a small committee of your membership and just sort of work through and try to determine what your mission statement would be. And then, as Amy mentioned, lay out the plan for how you're going to obtain that. I know that we've in the past have had retreats with our trustees where we've redefined our mission statement, where we've reviewed and updated our bylaws. And I think that has been really helpful because if you go someplace, separate, get out of your office, away from all other distractions where you can really devote the time. And it also just helps to form that camaraderie that's so important.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm wondering, going back to the earlier conversation about training and certification, and we've heard a lot about the role that associations can play. How do you see your association interfacing with other entities in terms of this professionalization, in terms of the state office, the university, other parts of that ecosystem? How does your work as an association interface with that broader ecosystem?
I can
Go ahead.
start with that one. Sure. Again, in Colorado, the state handles a lot of that. They handle the entire certification program, but again, where we have a strong relationship, there's always an open dialogue back and forth where we talk about ideas about how to improve, what other topics we need to take on. I think where we were effective at impacting the certification was actually just last year in our legislative session. It was after the security breach in Mesa County. And as Jed alluded to, we had a clerk who never took the time to learn the job, learn the systems, I think she was elected thinking she was winning a beauty pageant as opposed to being a leader and somebody who was a serious policymaker. But one of the things that became apparent was Colorado had a requirement that you had to get your certification within 2 years. And it was important from my members that the public hear from us that we don't stand behind what happened, and that, we wanted to make sure we were holding ourselves accountable. And so part of the bill that we ran last year with the secretary, with Judd and their team, was we advocated to move that certification requirement up from 2 years to 6 months. Because we felt before you could do your job, you should know your job. And unfortunately, we had a bad apple who proved that to be true. So that's, so whether it's liaising with the state on what that program looks like, or working through the legislature to make sure that it's meeting the needs of our members and, more importantly, our voters, there's lots of different ways the association can help facilitate that.
Yeah, I would go along the same lines. We have a really good relationship with our Division of Elections and our Department of State in Florida. We work with them. They don't do our certification, but they do attend and they do teach some of the courses. And so that's a important part of it. And then we do partner, but we work with them on legislative issues because we do have different points of view. Supervisors are the ones, implementing and running the elections, and the division is more policymaker. They do, all the rulemaking and all that part of it. So I think that relationship is an important one. It's always been a strong one. I used to work at the state, and it was all flipped, but those are the election experts in the state, the supervisors and their staff, and then the division. So I think that's really important. And then in terms of partnering outside of elections, people, I think the certification programs have been really helpful in bringing universities in and this different viewpoint. When we have conferences, we do have, academics come in and talk about, statistics and explain to us what the voting trends are. And so I think it's important to think outside of perhaps the logistics on elections. And there's lots of partners that are willing to come in and be a part of that.
Yeah. Sherry, any thoughts on your end?
Yeah, I'll just add, through our partnership with Ohio State University, we were able to develop core classes that were Ohio specific. So I think that was a tremendous help. Not to say we definitely have other advanced learning opportunities to cover other subjects outside of elections, but that was definitely a benefit of partnering with Ohio State. The other is, when COVID hit and we could no longer hold these classes in person, Ohio State was instrumental in helping us get those courses online. And now being able to offer more of a hybrid system where we have both in-person and online, it's really increased the number of election officials that are participating in the program. Not all election officials can get away for the day, and just the cost of travel is sometimes difficult. And so being able to offer online has definitely been a benefit.
What, how do you guys think that state associations can help connect members, especially in these smaller or more remote jurisdictions, with some of the bigger federal or other kinds of national resources? You guys have this unique position in being able to be almost like a last mile entity, right? You can reach down to the locals in ways that maybe big federal agencies always can't. So how do you see yourselves performing that function, especially when it comes to, something like a HAVA grant program or cybersecurity assessments or other kinds of resources that exist at the national level?
I don't mind going first on this one.
Feel free.
Well, I think something that was recently created, is the AAC's Local Leadership Council, right? Where each state now has 2 representatives on that council. And I currently serve as well as the past president of the Ohio Association of Election Officials. So it's a funneling of information because we're serving on that council. So we're receiving information regarding, different programs, grants, different tools for elections officials that are offered through the EAC, and just being able to funnel that and share that down to the local county level. I think something else that we've done is we have several committees. As I mentioned before, we're governed by a board of trustees. We also have a pretty large legislative committee made up of 40 members. And we try to make sure that our committees are diverse, as far as small, medium, and large counties, as far as their roles as board members, directors, deputy directors, and then also from geographically throughout the state. So we just try to make sure that we have very diverse committees.
Great. Other thoughts, Matt?
Sure. I think another area for this again becomes advocacy. So, as you said, these folks that make up our last mile, they have so many things. They're actually on the counter doing a voter registration or issuing a driver's license or, recording a marriage license. They're the ones doing the work, much different than my experience or larger counties experience, where it's solely more of an executive role. I think the advocacy part, though, is important. So one is making sure that we get information down to them, keeping that connective tissue strong. But I think, I'm thinking about this right now, actually, Judd and I, Mutual Admiration Society, we do a lot together. But right now we're tag teaming part of the federal government because the grant process is not clear. And so if you say you have a grant out there, but it's not accessible or easy for people to find, it's not really accessible. So that's one of the things that we can try to do from these positions as well, is work with our federal partners to try to streamline that process, or at least find the information and then put it in a package that's super easy for our folks to consume, so they don't have to spend a lot of time searching on a terrible federal website where they can't find any links to anything. We can consolidate that and give it to our folks.
Yeah, great. So I would go along the same lines in terms of serving as kind of that hub for communications and information sharing. Every supervisor gets the same email from me, whether you're a small county or a big county. So everybody is getting the same information. We do also, like Sherry said, on our committees, we're careful to put small, medium, and large on all the different committees, partly for their involvement, but also their viewpoints are very important. On the different areas. We do a lot with grants and trying to explain what this grant is, and on the state level too, not just federal. But then the other thing I think is really beneficial is a lot of our members are on the boards of these federal organizations, like, here's all the acronyms and I do not know what they all stand for. Like EI, ISAC, we have quite a few on that one. One of ours was, I think, the chair of the election center for a while. One of the current EAC commissioners was our division of elections director. So we have some of these contacts, and they, bring back the information and share it. They invite their friends from these organizations to come speak at conferences and things like that. So I think that, and just involving them in all of it, because it's all relevant to everybody.
Yeah, that's great. It's such a real important kind of connective tissue between big national entities and locals. One last final question is, how do you think are, sort of the state association of election officials compares to, or what could it possibly learn, if anything, from other kinds of associations of local public officials? We heard Tammy, Patrick earlier talk about sheriff's associations and the way that they are advocate for higher paying dues, and they're able to sort of provide more support from their members. I'm just wondering, have you seen across government in your respective areas other things that state associations in the election space could learn from how other sectors are supporting their members?
So I don't know that this is not answering your question, but it just made me think of one of the things that's really a benefit is when you do have relationships with these other organizations in your state. So when something comes up and we're going to have to do something new with the clerk's office, we can reach out to the organization and kind of, talk on that level of all the members and how it's going to affect everybody. And so I think that, I don't know if that's necessarily learning from them, but I think that's an important part of it, is that they have the same kind of benefits that we have, just in different silos. And so I think it's, and you can learn, like sometimes we, see, event ideas or where they're having something and we steal it.
Yeah. Any other thoughts?
No, I think that's right. You always strive. I think one of the things too, I would bet about all three of our associations is you're always striving to improve. You never want to be the same very long. You always want to move forward. It gets too boring otherwise, and you're not effective for your members. So it is taking a look at what others do and seeing if you can incorporate it. Like Amy said, I've been writing down notes from their presentations too. Like, I can't wait to connect after this to be like, hey, can you send me this? It really is, there's nothing wrong with taking somebody's idea and bringing it there, and maybe you make it a little better and they come back around and say, hey, I love how you built on that.
Yeah.
So that's the fun part of the job.
Yeah,
That's what's fun.
Sherry, last word from you.
I'll just sort of echo everything Amy and Matt just said. I know we have a subcommittee that works with the County Commissioners Association, because they in Ohio, they fund elections. So it's very helpful when we can team up together as two joint associations to lobby for funding for boards of elections. But also, like Matt and Amy said, it's definitely just a sharing of ideas and learning from each other. And I've definitely jotted down a lot of notes to take back with me as well.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for sharing the experiences of your states. We sort of felt like we did a tour of the country a bit and hearing from Ohio, Florida, and Colorado, but very interesting, I think, important infrastructure that you guys have built and sustained, and important resources that help address the professionalization and retention of our beleaguered but very important elections workforce. So thank you all for all your work and for the conversation. Yeah.
All right. Thank you everyone so much for joining us for our last panel of the day. We've heard from some really great panelists before, talking about all of their different election administration certification programs. And I'm really delighted to moderate this panel where we are going to delve into the role that national and in-state certification programs play in creating and retaining quality election administrators. So my name is Georgina Cannon. I am a former elections counsel for the U.S. House of Representatives Committee on House Administration. It's the committee that handles election administration and federal election law issues for the House of Representatives. And I am joined today by three fantastic panelists for what I think will be a great conversation. So directly to my left, I've got Ryan Ronco, who is the clerk, recorder, and registrar of voters for Placer County, California. Jennifer Morrell, the partner at the Elections Group, and Matt Masterson, Director of Information Integrity at Microsoft. So I'm going to hand it over to the three of them to talk a little bit about their work and their interaction with national and in-state certification programs, and then we'll launch into some fantastic questions that we've gotten from all of you. So Ryan, I'll turn to you first.
Fantastic. Thanks, Georgina. Hello, everybody. Big props to Humphrey School and to Larry Jacobs, Judge Choate. Thank you so much for the invitation, for being here. We appreciate this opportunity. I don't know how many of you are already elections officials, but for those of you that are actually studying to hopefully maybe become an election official, I just wanted to say off the bat, I hope we haven't scared you away today. This is a really rewarding profession, and it is a lot of fun a lot of the time. As a person that's been doing this for nearly 30 years, we have bumps in the road, and we're experiencing some of that, right? But for the most part, this is a great place to be. So I hope that we haven't scared you away. So I am the registrar of voters for Placer County, California. It's the 18th largest jurisdiction in California. It's the 167th largest jurisdiction in the United States. That doesn't fit on a foam finger type of thing. But Neil Kelly said he was the 4th largest jurisdiction earlier. I just wanted to brag that we're up there. I'm president of the California Association of Clerks and Elections Officials, but I really shouldn't be. And this goes to the topic of what we heard earlier today, which is that people are leaving the profession. And really, honestly, I wasn't on the executive board of this association 3 years ago. I was put onto this board because people that were on the board at that time were all either moving to other jobs or they decided to leave the profession. So it's unfortunate that we're in this period. But thankfully, because we have strong associations, usually across the country, we could find people like myself and others who were able to just plug in. But very similar to what you heard about Florida and some of these other associations, we're run by an executive board, 2-year terms for president, vice president, treasurer, secretary. But we do not have an executive director. So that means that the job of leading that organization falls to whoever is on that executive board at that time. And I'll just mention this too, because everybody was mentioning how long they've been in association or how long their association has been. 1908, 115 years in California, right? So no, Georgina, I was not there in 1908. I'm sorry. So CalPEAK is the program that I'm here to talk about. That's the California Professional Elections Administrator Credential Program. And CalPEAK was born out of this idea that here in California, we like to train our line staff. We had a program that was very, very successful called Summer Institute. It's not a credentialing program, but it was for the people that were doing specific tasks every other year in the quote unquote odd year, for them to come and be able to meet together and dig deeper into that task that they do, whether that's filing candidates or registering voters or recruiting and retaining poll workers, whatever that was. We decided at that time, about 20 years ago, because our program will turn 20 in November of this year, that we really needed something that also fed the soul of the management staff, not just the line staff. So the idea of this training program, this certification program, was born from that. Big shout out to Donna Johnston, who's the Sutter County, California registrar, and Tricia Weber, who's the Santa Cruz registrar in California, who are our elections committee co-chairs, because when I reached out to them to ask them how much time they put into this program every year, they said 50 hours a year. I'm sure it's probably closer to at least 100 hours a year, if not more, to try to work a program and manage a program that helps to train our management staff. The program is managed by us, but we partner with the Election Center. So which works with Auburn University to put on a wonderful program, but this is really kind of separate from that program. We do have 10 classes that we offer as part of this program. They are conducted in conjunction with our annual conferences. We have 2 conferences a year. So we will have classes before the conference to be able to bring people together to learn. Those classes vary from, federal and constitutional law to poll worker recruitment and retention. But I think what makes our program a little bit unique, similar to the Florida program probably though, is that we have 2 classes that are offered that are California centric, because all of our states have laws that are unique to our states. So we want to make sure that that we're paying attention to those. We can take that deep dive for management at that time. In the lifetime of this program, we've had 420 graduates of our program. We have 937 other individuals that have taken at least 1 class so far. So, they're on their way. Of those 420 and 937, I can't tell you how many are still actually involved in elections administration. Certainly some have moved on and are not doing this job anymore. But there's no extra pay usually associated with this. There might be an individual county or 2 that recognizes this or recruits for that, but it's not like the state pays us anymore because we've taken this class. I think I'll leave it there so that we can be able to get to a lot of those great questions that Georgina said. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Jennifer, do you want to go next?
You bet. Thanks, Ryan. And similarly, just a big shout out to Larry and Judd and the University of Minnesota folks. I'm so proud to be a part of the CEA program here. It's such a wonderful endeavor, so professionally ran, and really appreciate these events that they put on each year. And throughout the year, we've had some great webinars as well. I'm actually going to take this to a really personal level. So I'm sitting here in this seat talking to you as somebody who's been a local election administrator and been in the elections field for almost 14 years now because of state and national certification and training programs. I started out as a local municipal clerk in Utah, and I didn't know anything about any of the core components of running that job. And somebody suggested to me, you should sign up for the International Institute of Municipal Clerks. They have a certification program. They have training. It's ran mostly locally through a university with, pardon me, some national conferences. And I did that. And one of the things that I can remember from that, it was the first time I was introduced to the election code, or to like the rule book or the code of law. And for those of you that haven't gone to law school, right, that's a whole education. And sort of learning how to take that book of laws that comes out and is revised every year, and learning how to navigate that and learning how to use that to ensure that the things that you're doing in your office are in compliance with federal and state law. But more importantly, I developed a peer network of other municipal clerks and recorders who were able to give me advice, answer questions, and share materials from their own office. It's the first time I went to put a candidate guide together. I reached out to one of those clerks to see if I could borrow hers. As I moved into more election administration and became an election director, I got involved with, at the time it was called IACRIOT, now it's IGO, lots of acronyms, the International Association for Government Officials, and they had their certified public official program. So I enrolled in that. A lot of management courses really taught me how to better manage my staff, manage my office. And one in particular I remember was around ethics, but not just ethics generally, ethics in election administration. It was a really powerful course. But again, the additional value there was I got to know people that weren't just in my state or locality, but now I started to interact with individuals from other states and to learn from them and learn from the experiences they were going through. I then later on became aware of the Election Center and enrolled in their CERA program, which I'm a graduate of, their Certified Election and Registration Administrator. I'm going to really get beat up if I get these wrong. And again, this is where I met people like Tammy Patrick talking about the PCA report, which was one of the most exciting things I'd ever heard at the time. There were standards, national recommendations for national standards. It's where I met some folks from Colorado who described this utopia of election administration that would soon draw me to become a deputy of elections there several years later. It's where one of my favorite courses through the CERA program is I got to learn about the history of elections, starting from ancient Greece all the way through today. And one of the most powerful things in that course was taking the literacy tests that were often given prior to the Voting Rights Act. And it was a very powerful emotional thing to understand where we had been and where we are now and the work still that needed to be done. Then, as some of you know, I became an election official in Colorado. You heard from Matt earlier, and I got to participate in the Colorado certification program. You already heard Matt and Judd talk about that. That was also a really important sort of milestone in my career, because now I got to take these things that were talked about sometimes theoretically or sort of big picture and get down in the weeds. Ryan talked about his program, right, with local officials that were right there in my community, in my region, in my state. We could talk about how to apply Colorado law. It's the first time I remember being taught how to write an intergovernmental agreement that would be effective in creating and establishing drop boxes. We got to talk about the ins and outs of poll worker recruitment and training and list maintenance, but within the sort of lens of Colorado. And there was some conversation earlier about state certification programs. I think we're going to talk a lot about the national part, but they're so important. They're so vital. You need both. You need to have that sort of opportunity to drill down into the local requirements. I'm really excited to say the elections group just put out a case study today on Florida's program, which you got to hear from Amy earlier. And again, in addition to what I was learning, there was that peer network, that chance to share resources, to share best practices, to get advice, to get sort of help and support. And I need to do, I'd be remiss if I didn't do a shout out here to Matt Crane, who you heard from earlier. He was the clerk I served under. And I'm so lucky that he, as the election official, valued training and certification. He was willing to invest, not just in the cost to enroll in these programs, the cost to travel, to participate in those programs, but also the time away from the office, right? When you're running a busy office, having the luxury to leave for a few days or a week or whatever it is really valuable. Now I get to take that experience, that knowledge, but also that network of folks that I've come to know, and some have become dear friends. And I've been able to bring that into the CEA program here at Humphrey. So I get to teach election security. I get to bring that experience and that sort of depth of knowledge. And what's really cool is I also get to learn from individuals who are thinking about this, not having been election administrators, but coming at it from, I might want to be an election administrator. And really, every election official in this country should have the same opportunity that I have. They all should have that investment made in them to have these experiences, to have both rigorous sort of academic instruction, as well as the opportunity to see and hear from peers across the country, to see best practices. And maybe more important, we talked about, Amy did a good job mentioning the mental health needs of election administrators. Every election official needs a place where they can go to draw on that passion and that enthusiasm that we always see and hear from election officials, but sometimes we need a place where we can concentrate that, and often it's in these training courses. One of the other reasons this is so vital, and I know we've talked about this before, is that election administration is becoming so complex. And it's growing in complexity. I don't think we're even there yet. In fact, I think we might be on the verge of another sort of complex layer as we start talking about AI and things like that. But we think about the management needs. Think about law and governments and security and technology and audits and communications. Election administration is growing in complexity. In addition to that, or as part of that, we're in this environment now where we really don't have the luxury any longer. I don't know if we ever did, but we don't have the luxury of mediocrity and incompetence. And what I mean by that is we're seeing offices where they've been under that spotlight, they've had to deal with that harassment. We've seen turnover, we've seen a loss of knowledge. That has often then led to an election where there are issues or problems. Those issues or problems create greater scrutiny. We have additional turnover. Then sometimes as a result of that, there's another failure. Then that often leads to sort of unqualified hiring. That then leads usually to bigger failure. So we have this terrible cycle. And when that happens, it affects all of us. Right? That failure, whether it's ballots that went uncounted or a voter registration list that wasn't updated the way it should be, or as Charles mentioned, a bad experience at a polling location, that affects all of us because it ends up bolstering this narrative that we can't feel confident about our elections. So training and certification programs right now, I think, are one of the most vital things that we could focus on, that we could invest in. It's the best way to ensure continuity of practices. So I'm so glad we got to hear earlier from Ohio and Florida and Colorado, because those are three states when I think about continuity, meaning that you can expect elections to be administered pretty similarly in all of the jurisdictions in that state. It's probably no coincidence that they have strong associations and strong certification programs. It's really how we both boost best practices, but also drive innovation. It's through these training programs where we take an idea or concept and we surround ourselves with other election professionals and we say, I have an idea. Can we talk about that? And we usually end up coming with something better. The need to sort of ensure we have qualified applicants or qualified individuals to fill these roles is so vital, whether it's new or whether it's that line level staff that's running doing your voter registration data entry or processing ballots, that needs to have the qualifications and training to be able to step into those management roles or step into those leadership roles. And again, I'm going to say it like over and over again, the peer network, the sort of support structure, it's essential. And that goes back to that. We can't afford a weak link. And so when training and certification are coupled with strong association, I've seen that in action. Matt kind of hinted at it, but I certainly in my time in Colorado saw that happen. Issues that could have turned into big problems were avoided because of that support. You know, we've heard a lot of conversations lately about funding in election administration. We talk a lot about funding, technology, the need for new buildings, infrastructure, that sort of thing. We absolutely have to think about how we're funding and supporting the human resource side of election administration. That means we need more people for sure, but we need more qualified people. We need more people with the professionalization, the ethics, the sort of desire to step into this role that is a pretty awesome role, Ryan. So thanks for reminding us of that, so that we can continue to sort of support and sustain our democracy.
Thank you, Jennifer. Matt, do you want to wrap us up?
Yeah, I mean, same. What So first of all, thank you to the folks at Minnesota. Thank you to Judd. I'm proud to serve on the board and support the good work that's happening here and the training that's happening. I was fortunate, you all may be wondering, why is a guy from Microsoft sitting up here? I was fortunate, I was an EAC commissioner and then worked at CISA, leading the election security work out of the Department of Homeland Security from 2018 through the 2020 election, and had been a state election official in the great state of Ohio. Sherry Poland's actually my local election official, and so proud to have her and the incredible work she and the team do, and all the local election officials in Ohio. And the great work that they do. And so in looking at this, I kind of want to take what Ryan and Jennifer said and pull back just a little higher level. It's also personal to me. I think you hear the personal nature for each one of us. These certification programs are so much more than certification programs, but in fact, communities of not only practice, but communities of knowledge, communities of core competency, and communities of support to so many of us. I was laughing with Amy Cohen last night and Jennifer this morning that local election officials in Ohio, when I worked at the state, were always quick to remind me that I've never run an election. I just work at the state level, and they're 100% correct, right? They're the ones dealing every day with the nitty gritty. And so what these training opportunities, certification process in Ohio, the work that happens here in an election center in so many places allows those of us that either worked at the state level or certainly at the federal level to do is to plug into that local community, that state community of practice, and understand the core competencies and needs of the election officials in a way that allows us to do a more effective job in supporting state and local election officials. And so this conversation about a national program, and I know we're going to have a conversation about the need for a national certification program, what it can look like, how it works, is an interesting one, because so much of what state and local elections are so local, right? So specific. So many election officials, when you're having a conversation about any given practice or procedure or policy, the statement always starts with, well, in my state, ... right? And then you get into it. But if you pull it up a level, there's shared practices, shared commitments to things like transparency, professionalism, bipartisanship that cross all borders, cross all lines. And so the first note I'd have is just sharing my CISA experience and the value of a certification program and education and elections. Before I went to CISA, when I was at the EAC, and even when I was in Ohio, I was fortunate to do election official as an IT manager training as part of the election center training, but also as part of conversations that we had in Ohio and nationally. And the purpose of that training came about from the understanding that state and local election officials more and more were dependent on technology. And in fact, in most counties across the country, the election office is the largest IT operation in any given county. If you look at total number of assets, total number of systems run, it is a complex IT system. And oftentimes, especially back then, election officials would say, well, I'm not really an IT person. Like, I don't really. And the reality, as Jennifer touched on, is they've now been thrust into this environment. And certainly we're talking, 2012 to 2016, thrust into the IT management role. So with the 2016 election, and the Russian targeting of our IT operations, right? That ostensibly we had a nation state targeting election systems. That training, that information, that work that we had put into election official as an IT manager became all that more important, because now we're talking a level of risk, a level of threat that we've never seen before, right? And so how do we quickly wrap our arms around, okay, what does this mean? What is the level of risk? What mitigations can be put into place? And what steps can the federal government working with state and local election officials take to support them? Well, that conversation's only possible if we're all speaking the same IT management language, right? And so the ability to engage with communities like the election center, like state certification programs, like some of the work we had done at the EAC on training, allowed us to have that conversation in a more mature way than we would have been able to had that conversation not already started years in advance, right? We couldn't have talked about the risks or the data management challenges or what it meant to gain access to an election database and really where it's not as risky as people perceive. And here's why, because these are the protections that we have. We couldn't have had that conversation if there wasn't that shared community of practice speaking with one voice about how there's resilience in the process, right? And the natural overlap in that conversation was one of resilience. Election officials, though, at the time, again, 2012, 2014, even into 2016, 2018, didn't think of themselves as IT managers, but they were natural risk managers. Every election official I know asks themselves, what could go wrong? How do I prepare? What's my backup plan? What other steps do I have to take? Well, that's risk management. That's IT risk management. And so simply applying that mindset, that already set thought process that election officials naturally have through their communities of practice in their state and nationally, and applying it to an IT environment, right, to the systems that apply to it. And so the ability to engage and educate, and really to have the election community educate us on the types of systems. And this story, I think, has been told pretty widely, but the initial conversation with the election community around 2016 was one in which the federal government came in. I was at the EAC at the time, so I feel like it wasn't DHS at that time, but came in and said, oh, we know everything's connected to the internet. You know, what are we going to do to mitigate this? And the election officials went, whoa, you have no idea what you're talking about. And we literally had to start from square one to say, here's how systems are administered across the states. Here's some similarities. Oh, by the way, it's different in every state. And what was supposed to be about an hour-long conversation between some of the federal agencies and election officials turned into a 3-hour education session for the federal agencies on how elections were actually administered. And it was only possible because election officials had already engaged in this competency building around their own systems and IT management practices, even if they didn't think of it that way. And we've seen the impact of that as we've moved from 2016 into 2018, 2020, and 2022, where less often, though still happens occasionally, you don't hear the explanation from an election official that, oh, it was a glitch, or there was, right, these generalities. But in fact, the recognition that we have to be transparent about our systems, how our systems are administered, what redundancies exist, and how we manage a problem that goes on. And the best example, in my opinion, is Tina Barton and the way that she walked through in detail how the challenge she faced in the 2020 election, how she remedied that issue, and that you could have confidence in the integrity of the election. Second, shared experience or shared concept is that one around core competencies and expectations. And I know Matt certainly mentioned it, others have mentioned it, but the best example to me of this is the Tina Peters example from Colorado. And I know we've touched on it a lot, but when we look at training and establishment of core competencies and values, Jennifer mentioned ethics, I look at the Tina Peters case as the perfect example of both the value of these certifications and expectations and the application of them. When the Tina Peters story sort of emerged and it became clear that really for the first time that I can remember, there was an insider threat, right? This was an insider threat to an election. How did the Colorado clerks as a community and then election officials as a community respond? They rejected her as being out of line with their core competencies and professional ethics. They stood together as a bipartisan group and said, no, that is not who we are. She does not represent how we behave, how we hold ourselves out professionally, and how we administer elections, not only in this state, but then nationally, national organizations saying, absolutely not, this isn't how we behave. For those of us that have been around elections, and I was laughing the other day, I used to be sort of the younger guy in elections. I'm now the old man in elections that sits there and goes, oh man, I'm super gray. But those competencies were instilled in me when I got into elections as an intern at the EAC by attending election center conferences and trainings, and by, frankly, going to the bar with election officials and picking their brains about what the expectations. Formalizing that education process beyond the experience I had at the election center is really critical. Still go to the bar, that's still part of the process, but having those formal trainings and expectations in which peer-to-peer exchanges happen where folks can say, here's who we are as a community, here's what we stand for, right? And so much of that is conveyed not just formally through an education, but in the exchanges you have in the classroom. I was fortunate to teach the law class here for the election certification program. Just in the exchange, so much of the legal issues weren't really legal issues. It was really a matter of ethics and practice, right? And how we represent ourselves as a community. I really feel like that came to bear nationally in the response to how Tina Peters' behavior was rejected by the community as a whole. Republican, Democrat, small, medium, large, doesn't matter what state. That's not who we are. That's not what we stand for as a community. And then finally, the value on a national scale I think, and this really boils down to a question that I know every election official really since 2016, certainly since 2020 gets, which is, okay, fine. I trust you in your process, but I don't trust the people in that state. Or why should I trust the people in that state? In Ohio, we always point to Michigan just because it's Michigan. It is what it is. But why should we believe that state and the results of their election? And the value of these national programs and these national exchanges is it gives an answer to the election officials, where election officials can say, you know what, I don't know the laws in that state. I don't know the practices in that state specifically, but I have been in a room with election officials from that state, and I've shared best practices, and I've worked with them on projects, and I know this. I know that they're committed to a transparent process. Their transparency laws may be different than mine in my state, but I know they have a transparent process. Second, I know they're committed to administering elections in a bipartisan or multi-partisan way. Again, the rules may be different, right? What we do in Ohio, as Sherry described, is different than Colorado, but the parties are involved and we welcome that participation because it's an important part of the process. And third, and most importantly, I've been in the certification classes with them. I've been in the training classes with them. I've been working on projects with them. They are professionals. They administer elections in a professional way. They don't just wake up on a Tuesday in November and decide today's the day I'm going to administer an election, but in fact, spend every day thinking about how do we get better? Where do we improve? Where are our risks? And the way we saw this play out in the 2020 election, from my vantage point at CISA, was really in the response to COVID. So we had built up this network of communication and response focused on cybersecurity, right? So we have the EI-ISAC, right, where you can share cyber threat information and intelligence. We have our regional staff from CISA out working with state and local election officials. We have connections with Election Center and IGO and NAS and NASED and this constant exchange, all focused on cybersecurity, right? That we were fighting the last battle, as it were, on that. And then all of a sudden, a global pandemic springs up. And what happens? The election community engages with us at CISA and says, okay, what do we do? How do we prepare? How do we respond? What's this look like? What are we seeing? Wisconsin, ooh, that primary was tough. What did we learn? Ohio, oh, that, moving an election, that's rough. What's that look like? And so working with Jennifer, working with Amy, working with some other experts, and most importantly, working with the elections community, in a matter of weeks, we were able to produce best practice documents around 20 different topics, literally 20 different topics that would be impacted by COVID to help support election officials administer that election. And those papers weren't specific to any given state or any given law, but they were specific to the general practices, the general ethos, the general approach, and detail that election officials needed to take and use it in their state as applicable, whether that was moving to more vote by mail, moving to more drop boxes, moving to larger vote centers like we saw with some folks moving to arenas or cities. That was only possible because of the shared community of practice that existed across the elections practice. That doesn't happen in other areas where there isn't that shared certification, shared community. It doesn't have, it has to be formed in the midst of the crisis. Well, thank God we had it, right? Thank God we had it. And it's a tribute to the certification programs and sort of the national web that exists across. You have your state associations, your local associations, but then these national associations all coordinate and share that information. So that's what I got. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you all. I think it's really clear from what you all had to say how passionately you feel about the importance of these election administration certificate programs, election administration education. And that's really, really come through. I think one of the themes that I heard from you all just now, and I've kind of heard throughout the day, is the importance of the network that you build. These programs, they aren't just about the additional education that you're getting, although that has a lot of value, but it's also about the network that you're building. How do you feel like participants can best use that network? How can they make the best of the relationships that they're building during that program? Ryan, why don't we start with you and kind of work our way down?
Well, it's a great question. I think that, when I look at California's program, I think that it's a wonderful starting point, but it's not a be all end all, right? It's when you can be able to complement that with CIRA training, or you can complement that with this certification or what IGO does with their certification program, then you not only learn about other options that you might have to put into your toolbox if you have a problem, but you also gain this peer network or maybe a mentor that can see a problem very differently. I know that in California, in my example, I'm a 30-year election employee, but I've only worked in this one office the entire 30 years. So if I didn't have an opportunity to be able to branch out and meet people and learn other things, then I would only know how to do things based on the people that taught me before. And I won't have this opportunity to be able to reach out to a Bill Cowles in Florida, who I got to know back in when it was called IACRI, as opposed to IGO, and say, hey, what do you guys do in Florida about this thing, right? And so I think that the big thing for me is building that network that you can be able to rely on to look outside of your particular box and be able to turn that box over and look at that problem from a different direction or a different side.
Yeah, three quick things, I guess. Matt touched on it. We think that elections, each state and jurisdiction is a special snowflake, but the reality is operationally, we're all doing things pretty much the same. So really recognizing that even though you might be from a state in Utah and you're talking to somebody from Tennessee about their program around poll worker recruitment or training or chain of custody, don't just assume that it's not applicable to you, right? So really taking advantage of asking to take a look at actual sort of documents, training documents, forms, the other thing. I think there's an opportunity to sort of strengthen the way that we train and teach. So we've had really great success at the elections group with some audit convenings that we've held where we've brought people in and we've taught them something about audits, but then we've given them or facilitated with them the opportunity to explore how to make that better. So I think thinking about education, but also innovation as part of that training. And then Matt mentioned this, we've heard some talk about election professionals taking a stand within their own state. I think there's a greater need and opportunity to take a stand as association members, whether that's individual associations or quite frankly, we should be doing that more broadly when we hear one of our own being attacked, a strong public statement in defense or in supports of that individual or entity.
Yeah, just two quick things. One is, sorry, one is a very, it's not good. I don't blame, I'd turn the mic away from me also. One is a very real experience for me, and that is the Rolodex it creates for you, which seems obvious, but I'll share an example. In 2018, when the ISAC was just getting up and going, I was new to CISA, and we were having to educate Congress and others on the work we were doing, right? And I remember vividly being in a briefing with Director Krebs about, sort of how are we reaching election officials? If something goes wrong, how will we know? And Director Krebs's response was, well, I've got that guy and he's got them all in his phone. And I'm thinking, oh God, I hope I've got them all in my phone. But it turned out I did, because even if I didn't know that person, I could call David Stafford in Escambia County and say, hey, can you connect me? Or I could call Jennifer and say, hey, can you connect me? Or do you know someone that's doing this and doing this well that we could talk about? Or I'm hearing there's an issue down there. Can you help me reach out so that we can find out what's going on? And so that Rolodex, I've never ever called an election official in any state and had them just say, yeah, I'm not interested in talking. No, thank you. Always in this shared profession, the willingness to share knowledge, to share practices, to share bad experiences is always available to us, and taking advantage of that Rolodex really is critical, which gets to my second point, which is that Rolodex makes the impossible possible. That so often in elections where you all are under-resourced, not just money, but with support like IT support and also time, your most valuable resource, right? The clock's always ticking. That ability to reach out to that Rolodex on a practice or a change that feels absolutely impossible and learn and understand very, very quickly. How did you go about doing this? How did you implement this change? What controls did you put in place that I can feel comfortable with it? And doing that quickly is invaluable, particularly as we saw with COVID, where changes were happening very quick. Often in elections, you'll hear people say changes evolutionary, not revolutionary. Well, 2020 and COVID made it revolutionary, right? That was change at a speed most election officials rightfully were not comfortable with. But that Rolodex, that ability to connect, the willingness of people like Lori Agino and others to say, here's how we did vote by mail in Washington, and the lessons we learned right away was critical. So it really does make the impossible possible.
Thank you. That was a great answer from all three of you. Matt, I think in your remarks, you did a really great job about talking about the way in which the profession transitioned in 2016 and the aftermath, and the increased role for of IT security and technology in the election space. And it got me thinking, and Jennifer, in your remarks, you talked about all of these fantastic programs that you did. What do you think the role is in the election administration space of not just that single certificate program, but continuing education as well? How can we make sure that we are equipping our election administrators with the knowledge that they need to adjust to changing environments? It's not just one-off training. Elections aren't stagnant. So Jennifer, since you have pursued so many different opportunities, why don't we start with you and then maybe go to Matt and Ryan?
Yeah, I think part of it is understanding there are different needs that all of these programs fill some of, right? So there certainly is the need to understand sort of these higher level management skills, if that's not the skill set or education that you're bringing to the table. There's certainly a need to understand the history and the laws and sort of the academic view, I guess, of election administration. But there's also a need to understand just the day-to-day operations. How do we successfully ensure that we can reconcile and account for all of our ballots, both those that are cast in person as well as, mail ballots and others that come to our office? And so I think it would be great if there was sort of a national set of standards around this, both for initial qualifications as well as like certification and recertification. We've talked a lot about the initial certification, but that recertification part. So like now that I've got my baseline of skill sets, how can I build on that? How can I create more depth and breadth in terms of the knowledge and things that I'm learning from? I think I love the virtual option. You lose that sort of networking piece there. So I think a solution is both. The other part we haven't talked about yet is that resource constraint of time and people, meaning how do I either leave my office physically or take off for 3 hours, or thinking about the slides that said I don't come home until midnight and I go to sleep and I start all over again. Where do you work into that professional education and certification and training? So I think, I don't know that I answered your question rather than sort of presented. There are, I think, a lot of questions still or sort of challenges that we need to be thinking about if we want to get to that space.
Yeah, I agree completely with Jennifer. I think back to the time that when Ryan Macias and I were out on the road doing the IT training, we'd show up at state certification conferences, state education conferences, and eyes would gloss over, like, why are we talking about IT management? This sounds horrible. This pre kind of 2016, but the ability to apply the already existing knowledge-based skill set and understanding of incident management and risk management that election officials already had made it applicable right away. And so the conversation connected with election officials very, very quickly because we were speaking their language, even though it was about technical items. And so as I look, sort of every election has at least one story, some have many stories, and the challenges or lessons learned or new competencies that come out from every election are a constant. And so the ability for election officials to evolve to those emerging needs. I mean, I think the EAC has up on their website this wheel of competencies. Basically, you're an accountant, you're a communicator, you're an IT manager. Yeah, that's going to ever expand, but the resourcing is never going to expand, or likely not to expand significantly. And so it's these training programs, it's these curriculums that allow for the support to election officials to build that competency into the new area. So we went from cybersecurity to physical security, something that election officials were already familiar with, but on a different scale and level than we had previously talked about, right? And what does that mean? What the next story for 2024 will be, I don't think any of us know. And so that ability to very quickly adapt our competencies and educate is just absolutely critical. And election officials do it very, very well. But if there's more ability to plug into these national trainings to do that, I think the better off we all are.
Ditto to both of you, although I will add to that you know, as an administrator in California, I think that national certification would be a great idea. I love the idea of being able to have a program that is either required or sought highly. You know, I think that would be fantastic. There in California, registrars like myself, some of us are elected, some of us are just appointed. So it really runs the gamut. So having something that unifies is great, right? There's no continuing education requirement for our certification program in California. So somebody like me who took the program nearly 20 years ago, that theoretic certification is good now as it might be for somebody who's graduating this year. And that doesn't seem right either. So having to re-up a certification, I think, is also a valuable tool and something that we should consider, because, you know, we were talking about election systems 20 years ago that were quite different than the ones that we have to deal with now. It's a capacity issue, though, for us and in states where we run those certification programs. It's just really hard to be able to rely on those individuals who say, you know, they put up their hand and they said, count me in. I want to make sure that our profession is, you know, as strong as it can be. And so I'm going to put the time in to serve on this committee. And they have to run their own elections departments, and they're running their families, and they're doing whatever they're doing in their communities. So it's just a matter of making sure that we can put out a product that is as valuable as we want it to be, by making sure that we don't burn people out who are willing to raise their hand and say, count me in.
Can I just note the irony, sort of pathetic nature that I referenced a Rolodex, which makes me very old, and I'm the guy from Microsoft, so that's pretty sorry, but we'll have to educate on what a Rolodex is.
Well, we'll leave that for another panel.
Yeah.
And transition on to another question instead. So I had written down, but I think you all have already answered this. What are the benefits of a state program versus a national program? But I think you all have already done a really good job of talking about how both have benefits and how they're equally necessary. But I think Jennifer, in her remarks, raised a really good point. If we're telling people they need the state certification, they need the national certification, also run this huge election, and it's always election season, how do you juggle it all? And so I wondered if you could talk about both your personal work experiences juggling continuing education requirements or training, and then also your job as well. And then broadly, how do you see people in the community handling it? Ryan, we'll kick it off with you since you're right next to me.
I'm not exactly sure how you handle it, to be honest, but you do. I think that, you know, for me, it is, as a person, you know, we were joking earlier, some of the other panels were joking about how there's no vacation in elections, right? It's kind of true, and it's kind of sad, and it shouldn't be that way. I'm the type of person that unplugs when I'm off by being connected to my office. I can't let go, right? I want to make sure I know what's going on. But I think what you do is you find those opportunities to be able to learn. And I think we're continuous learners in this job that we do. we absorb. We want to know what's going on. And I think that, you just, at the end of the day, because you value what you do and you value the role that you serve in the community, to making sure that they understand what you're doing and how you're being transparent. I think you just try to find the time. In California, we have somewhere between 75 or 60 to maybe 100, probably about 75 people that will attend our trainings at an annual conference. They're not always coming to the conference. The county sends them, and finds that time to cover them while they're out and all that. And I think that that's important so that we can be able to invest in them like we know that they need to be invested in. So I think that you just try to put aside what it is that you might be working on at the time to be able to show that you need to spend a little bit more time learning about the other facets of what we do.
Yeah, I'll just add to that really quickly. This is one of those things where sometimes it bothers me when we say, what is the election professional going to do? What are you going to do as the election administrator to make this thing happen? This is one of those times when I think, what are the boards of county commissioners and the secretaries of state and the boards of elections and the mayors? What are you going to do to ensure both that the office you're responsible for is adequately resourced so that that election administrator can take the time off and leave, or what are you going to do to support and encourage that individual to do that? And we're short of time, so I won't give you any more stories, but I certainly have seen both sides of that. And it's amazing when you can have those governing sort of budgetary authorities say to you, this is important, and here's how we're going to work with you, not just expect you to figure this out. We're going to work with you to make sure that your professional development happens.
Yeah, I'll just put in a pitch and be very short, which is for those offices that are larger than just the one or maybe two, the ability to find time for your employees to participate in the certification programs and receive that training then creates time for you to be able to do so, because you all now have created competencies within the office that allows you, even though all great election officials are control freaks, allows you to step away at least for that day, and go, engage in your own training and professional development. And so I know Ohio and the Ohio Association has done an incredible job incentivizing not just the leaders of the offices, but the staff to also participate. And so finding those incentives, in the end, that pays off because it buys you time. It builds up competencies. We've even started to see IT leads within counties that aren't part of the county election office start to participate in those trainings. That is an invaluable conversation to have as well. So finding that additional opportunity for new staff, it also helps with retention, right? Those professional opportunities are really, really important for that younger staff to retain and keep them.
Excellent, thank you. And can I just ask one more question? Because Amy Cohen brought up something in an earlier panel, and I wanted to take an opportunity to bring it up to you, especially you, Matt. I think Ryan said at the start, he didn't want to deter anyone from this profession, but I think we've also heard a lot about the challenges that election administrators are facing now. And it is an amazing community and a wonderful profession. But Amy in her earlier panel talked about how one of the biggest challenges she thinks facing election administrators is disinformation. And so I'm wondering specifically, how do you think these programs can help election administrators deal with the challenge of disinformation? And since we're short on time, Matt, I'll go to you first.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Twofold. One is being able to point to that professional certification, just as an accountant would, as a lawyer would, that ongoing training allows, we know actually from some research that was done at Stanford, that one of the things that increases trust in the process for voters or increases confidence is that the person in their community who lives and works in their community and runs elections is a professional, that they are professionally administering elections and their staff are. Certification programs, ongoing education help to reassert that professionalism, to constantly say, yes, I don't, I'm not doing it the way it was done 20 years ago. I'm constantly educating, as Ryan said. The second, which I brought up before, is the ability to say, okay, let's talk about Michigan or Colorado or Utah, wherever it may be. I don't know how they run it exactly, but I've been in the room, I've participated in professional education with these folks, and they are pros and they know what they're doing. And I've worked with them, and I can say with confidence, I don't know the specifics of what they do, but I know they professionally do it because I've worked with them, been with them. And then just quickly, I promise quickly. Amy's point is spot on, and this profession is spot on, but having been away from the profession a little bit at Microsoft and Stanford, I miss the heck out of this community of people, and that the optimism this community gives me when I come to events like this or talk with election officials is why people should get into this. This is the best community of professionals I've been around, and it is the best group of they are exactly who you want doing this job, and they do it so well constantly that if you're a young person looking at this, if you're getting involved, there's no greater group of people that will teach you, mentor you, involve you. And I woke up every day in elections knowing my job mattered and mattered deeply. And that's something that is hard to find in some careers. So I'll just stop.
Thank you, Matt. Ryan, I think you had something you wanted to add.
I
as
just wanted to throw in that, remember, the people that are our election integrity conspiracy theorists right now, they come at this because they're new to the process. So you're talking about disinformation. Remember that slide that Professor Stewart had up earlier, that most people don't know what we do. Think about establishing an elections academy in your jurisdiction where people that do not understand what goes on can come and be able to see what you do. That, talk about continuing education, that would pay huge dividends to make sure that we can educate those people that don't understand the process. And it's not their fault if they just now have gotten involved for the first time and they don't understand. We do logic and accuracy testing. Let's go ahead and make it a priority for ourselves so that we can teach.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for talking with me today. Larry and Judd, thank you so much for hosting. I think we've had a lot of amazing discussions today that I hope will continue. And I'm going to turn it over to Judd now for some closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Georgina, and a wonderful final panel. So this will sound self-congratulatory, but what an amazing conference, if I do say so ourselves here. Fantastic panelists, really did a lot of work to prepare and come to the conference with the moderators, very well attuned to the kinds of things that we wanted to focus on. And I just so appreciate the time and effort that they put into coming and talking to us today. I want to thank Larry Jacobs, Lee Chittenden, Cody Jackett. We also Isaac, who did a lot of the work back there. You can congratulate Isaac for constantly up and down and up and down and up and down doing the cameras. And then Sarah was here helping to get everybody focused earlier. So I do really appreciate all the folks involved with the Hubert H. Humphrey School of Public Affairs who put on this conference. A couple of big takeaways, which I think you heard about in this last panel, and I hope are the kinds of things that you will incorporate into your lives are, there are broad connections here. First of all, bad connections like mis and disinformation leads to bad performance, leads to low-hanging fruit for elections administrators, election deniers to connect. And we need to really overcome that. And then the good news is there are ways, and the ways you overcome that is through strong associations, good training and certification programs, and then the connection between and the camaraderie that's created by these strong programs and the people that you meet, and the understanding and education that happens across those conversations. So that's the takeaway. Those are the things we should all be focusing on. You should be talking to your local governments about funding to be able to participate in these kinds of programs, to strengthen your associations and participate in your local certification programs, or take these election center and CEA kinds of classes that are also available. If you're a young person or a early career person and are interested in furthering your understanding of elections administration, I want to encourage you to join our group at University of Minnesota at the Humphrey School, where we have a certificate of elections administration program. You can see some of the details there online. You can become a CEA, a certified elections administrator, through a 12-credit program. It doesn't take all that long. It's all online. It's set up by semesters. And you never have to travel. It's something that's accessible all the time. You can learn more information there. And just to give you a sense about some of the classes that are available, we have 2 classes that are set for June. You heard from Jennifer Morell today, just now, and she gave you every reason to want to take her introductory to election security class. And then Gina Roberts is also teaching a class coming up in June on voter outreach and participation, which should be a great course as well. Those both start June 5th. You don't have to be an elections administrator to take those. You don't have to be a person that plans to go into elections administration to take those. You might just be a person that really values this work and wants to learn more. Please sign up. Please come and learn more from the amazing instructors we have in the program. By the way, today you heard from Matt Masterson. Let's see if I can do this off the top of my head. Matt Masterson, Jennifer Morell, Tammy Patrick, Neil Kelly, and myself. All 5 of us teach classes in this program. So if any of you found one or more of those especially engaging and interesting, you should definitely sign up for their classes, and those will be over the next calendar year because we're always teaching classes. So please do learn more and sign up. Thanks again for a wonderful day. We really do appreciate it, and have a great rest of your week.